Order. The clerk will note those in attendance.
Noted.
Thank you. Would you stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is approval of the minutes of the October 8th, 2019 meeting. Are there any corrections to the minutes?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Any additions or deletions? Ms. Seinecker.
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, I had a conversation with you, Mayor, earlier or later last week after the agenda was distributed, and I believed you had some ideas about talking about the Tobacco 21 ordinance. So
Under discussion.
Under
yes.
discussion.
Thank you. With that, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now it's my distinct pleasure to call on Chief Swanson to come up. We are very fortunate to have a new officer being sworn in tonight. Chief Swanson.
Thank you. Mayor and members of the council and Ms. Heinecker, thank you for allowing us to come celebrate another swearing in of a new police officer. And our newest police officer is not an unfamiliar face to you, but I will give you a little bit of background on her. We're going to just formally welcome her to the department with this swearing in ceremony tonight. So the department is filling a vacancy that was a result of a retirement a few weeks ago. Tonight we are here to welcome Officer Kirsten Englund to the department. Kirsten, as I said, is a very familiar face to us. She started with us as a reserve about a year ago, and then she soon was switched over to the capacity of a community service officer in early 2019. So we've had a lot of opportunity to get to know her, and she's gotten a lot of opportunity to know us and our department, and she's been a very good fit to us. And without going into too many details, we stole her away from another department by having her come on early as a community service officer and getting her to get to know our officers and the community. So we're very fortunate to have her. So for a little background, she was born and raised by her mom, who was a St. Paul police officer and raised to the rank of commander. She passed away, unfortunately, about 3 years ago from a cancer diagnosis. Her mom worked in a very impressive career, and she was well known and highly respected throughout the city of St. Paul and the entire metro area. It's no doubt that she served as a role model and mentor to Kirsten through her growing up years, and Kirsten often talks about her mom as being an inspiration that steered her towards law enforcement career. It's also evident that the St. Paul Police Department staff are an extended family for Kirsten and her son, as many of them are here today joining her. Kirsten attended Century College for her law enforcement degree, which is where I first met her, and Captain Hager first met her when she was in school at Century. She is also enlisted in the United States Air Force Reserves, where she has previously obtained the rank of Staff Sergeant. She has served in the Air Force Reserves for the past 6 years and served a deployment in Kuwait in 2015. In addition to the military, Kirsten has worked a variety of jobs throughout college to include working at the St. Paul Police Department as a parking enforcement officer and then also an internship as an administrative assistant. And as I said, she joined us in 2018 and was later promoted to a CSO. I think Kirsten's most important job in life is probably that of being a mom and raising her son. She's joined today by her son Maddox, her stepfather Pat, and her boyfriend Bronson, and her son and stepfather will be pinning on her badge tonight. And again, I want to welcome all of the extended family and friends and visitors that she has had with us tonight. So, Kirsten, if you could come up, we will take the oath, and you can bring Maddox and your stepfather up. We haven't practiced this part, so I told her we'd walk her through it all. So if you could face Kara.
Okay. Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Kirsten Lee Englund,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the state of Minnesota,
and the state of Minnesota,
and will discharge and faithfully execute
and will discharge and faithfully execute
the duties devolving upon me
the duties devolving upon me
as patrol officer for the city of White Bear Lake
as patrol officer for the city of White Bear Lake
without fear or favor,
without fear or favor,
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're going to kneel down, so Maddox can do it.
Oh.
That's so sweet. There.
No, you do what you got. Congratulations. Seeing you on the job.
Okay.
And they're gone for cake, and we're working.
So if you guys want to go ahead and you can go back. We'll be back.
Let's see. Do I just click any votes?
I know. Make a noise.
I talked to her before, and Kirsten's mother was her best friend.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, well, I guess we can move on to item 4B. At this time, Rob Olson, our prosecuting attorney, is going to come up. Good evening, Mr. Olson.
Good evening, Mayor Emerson, members of the council, City Manager Heinecker, and staff. We've all met before, I think, all of us. I'm Rob Olson. I've been the city attorney for quite a while, city prosecutor. Used to do it with my old partner, Doug Meslow, who went on to bigger and better things. And we were asked to come and just kind of update you and keep it short. So I'll take that to heart. But we handle a variety of cases. We handle the simplest things from speeding tickets to ordinance violations to thefts to DWIs, and we get a lot of those in White Bear. And then we also handle domestic assault cases. And one of the focuses that when I talked to Chief Swanson about this, she'd indicated that the city was interested in hearing from us, is one of the things what we've been focusing on in a big way in prosecution for the past several years is domestic assault. And what we did was we've been looking at the numbers. We've been doing this in a more focused way. We did it with the city attorney or county attorney John Choi and their department. We partnered up. We learned some ways how to try those cases better, do a better job. And really the focus and kind of the stated effort was to try to get more convictions, get more people tagged. And we've been doing a good job at that. But we've also started noticing trends. And you always notice these trends in law enforcement. And if you dig into the numbers, you find, and one of the areas that we've noticed a trend and everybody has become more aware of in our society is the impact of mental health on people's behavior. And so what we did, we took 2018 as just a test case, and thank you, Ann. And we looked here. In 2018, we handled, how many cases was it, Luke? 60. 64 cases, or actually, yes, 64 cases. We got guilty pleas in about 70% of those cases, which I don't want to toot our own horn, but we do pretty good at that. But then, if you go to the next slide, we started looking at these cases, and you dig into the numbers, you read through police reports. We found that in 83% of the cases where you have domestic violence, you have mental health, you have chemical dependency issues, or you have both. And this is consistent with what we saw. We did the same thing with Lino Lakes last year. They kind of asked us to look at this. And we saw, it didn't really surprise us, but when you handle this every day, you never really, put the numbers together. Over there, we found about 70% of the cases. So I'm guessing about 3/4 of the cases that we have are people that have chemical dependency issues or mental health issues. And when we brought this up to Chief Swanson, she said, that's interesting, because we have just partnered with Roseville, and we've brought on a mental health caseworker. The City Council has a shared arrangement with Roseville. We've met with Christina, I apologize. We met with Christina, and she now is someone we can partner with, because there's a number of people in White Bear, and what we call in our business the frequent flyers, the people you see over and over again. And it's not surprising that these people have struggles with chemical dependency, and more we're seeing mental health. We're seeing a lot of mental health problems with these people. And then it becomes, am I interested as a prosecutor in just putting another notch on our gun belt? Or are we trying to affect change in these people's lives and maybe say these are people that need to be helped to change their behavior, trying to get at the root cause of what's bringing this about? And so we've been doing more of that. And if you could bring up the next slide, Ann. Luke McClure has been handling most of our cases in the past couple of years. And he can talk about a few of these and give you an idea, because it's one thing to talk about numbers. There's statistics, and then there's damn statistics, right? But there's real people behind these statistics. And Luke has increasingly seen this, and we were really glad to meet with Christina and find out that we would have a resource that would help us, because we have these people that are struggling, and we're trying to, sometimes I say we're not really prosecutors, we're glorified social workers. And I don't mean that to denigrate it at all, social workers. I think social workers are great, and we're finding in our profession there's things we have to do. So, Luke, I'm just going to ask if you could go through a few of those.
Thank you, Rob. And good evening, everyone. I just thought I'd give a quick example of one case in particular. I'll probably skip the second case. But this was the first time for me as a prosecutor where I dealt with a severely mentally ill young man. I couldn't communicate like I normally communicate as a prosecutor. I tried to reason with him. We tried to resolve the case without a trial and an option that would help him succeed and not reoffend. Unfortunately, it was such a difficult case. It was the first time I dealt with someone that had oppositional defiance disorder. He was severely opposed to law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, and he wanted a trial. It's also the first time where after a trial holding a domestic abuser accountable, I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like this is what I wanted to do as a prosecutor to make a difference in my community. And to make matters worse, the judge in that case, because likely his oppositional defiance disorder, gave him a maximum sentence. So that did him no good. It didn't help with his mental health. It didn't help with his chemical dependency. And that case always kind of stuck with me. I had talked to his mother, who was a victim in this case, and I learned from her what we were really trying to do to get him off the wheel that he was on. And none of that happened. He got out of jail, and he returned to being a problem in our community. He went to the YMCA, he had an outburst there, and several members of the community were concerned. So as an update, I got another bite at the apple later in 2018. He went on a rash of crimes. He was accosting law enforcement during traffic stops. And just last month, we were set for trial. This time he had a different attorney. We had a better understanding of how to deal with his specific issues. We came up with a plan for him to take his medication, to get back into therapy, and be on probation and have a chance to keep this off his record. Now, long term, I can't guarantee that this is going to fix all the underlying issues, but it was certainly a better outcome last month than what happened the first go-around when we had a trial and he just went to jail. So this time he's going to be dealing with his mental health issues. He's going to be seeing his therapist. He's going to be avoiding chemical dependency. And if he doesn't, then there'll be a consequence. So that's one of the things we're really hopeful for. We're really blessed to have a chief like we have in White Bear Lake who understands the mental health concerns in our community, that's doing those resources. And the White Bear Lake Police are some of the best. At that trial, the feedback from the jury and the judge was, wow, that officer had mental health training. He de-escalated the situation, and he did a fantastic job. And all the members of that jury said the same thing about the White Bear Lake Police Department. We've become a very good team at dealing with people in our community and helping the best outcome. If you go to the last slide, please. Okay, I'll do the next one very briefly. But the second case, just to give you another example of sort of what happens in the court system. This is a paranoid schizophrenic young man. And one of the main concerns in this case was firearms. He would post on social media that he had bought a new assault rifle, and we were very concerned. So sometimes the approach we take is to sort of initially throw the book at them so we can put some boundaries, some safeguards in place to get them on a conditional release, to lay the groundwork for them to work with therapy, stop using drugs, and get the mental health resources they need. Unfortunately, that case, he was so severely mentally ill that he was found incompetent to proceed to trial. So then we asked the court to civilly commit him, and that was helpful in that case. That's just to give you an idea of some of the tools we have as prosecutors when dealing with severely mentally ill people. If you could go to the last slide. So just in conclusion, our overall goals now in working with the police department, number one is always going to be community safety. So sometimes that means we do charge these individuals so that we can put those boundaries in place, take away firearms, and get them on a conditional release. In the long term, however, we're still seeking accountability, but that doesn't always mean a conviction. Sometimes that's going to be appropriate, and there's still probation when you get a conviction. Sometimes when the family members are telling us, I know my son, I know what's best for him, we're going to listen to that, and we're going to work with those families. And again, it's a huge asset in White Bear that the police are going to specialized mental health training, and now we have the community resources to meet with these folks when we make a referral to get them the help they need early on. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you both coming in tonight because this is an important project. I remember when we started this project several years ago, and I thank you for staying with it and getting the results you're getting, and now with the mental health issues. It's interesting to see those numbers and see what's driving a lot of our problems in the community. So I thank you for that. I know our police work very hard to de-escalate situations, and we've got a good team. So is there anybody, do any of you have any questions for Mr. Olson? No? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I think the next one is, Ms. Heineker's going to do this. This is interesting. We've got an interesting evening here.
Mayor, members of the council, it's my pleasure actually to introduce Daryl Tavola. He's a VP at AECOM, which is an American multinational engineering firm. And we had the privilege of working with Daryl and his team to put together a robust application to MnDOT for their CAV pilot program that they have available to applicants, and he's going to go through that. I want to, before Daryl, you go on with this, a few things I want to say. We have two of people from our committee that are here. There's Tara Jevonsing is here from the school district, and then we have Tom Snell here from the Chamber of Commerce. We also had, we had the participation from Sarah Paul. She's our assistant superintendent in the school district. Mike Greenbaum, who is from Nutrex. Many of you know Mike. Blaine Stevens, and I hope I'm not forgetting anybody, but it was a committee made up of people from our nonprofit community and then representation from the chamber, really to put together something that's quite unique. And so really happy that we've had AECOM and your expertise and experience in AV to really kind of lead us through this process. And a shout out to Tom Snell for getting us involved in the first place. So with that, I guess Daryl has a presentation you'd like to go through.
Thanks, Ellen. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this evening. So if you actually go to the next slide, Ellen was highlighting some of the people that were involved with the proposal we put together to MnDOT. There's 14 different agencies here. It was a great effort by a great group of people. Ellen did a lot of work forming this partnership for the pilot. It's actually pretty exciting because we've got something really unique that's starting to unfold here. And what I want to do tonight is just give you a little bit of background and kind of lay out what the concept is so you have a better understanding of what's going to be coming. Next slide. So go ahead, next slide. So really, why are we even thinking about automated vehicle technology and this specific project? So you can really look at it in three different areas, kind of safety, increased mobility, and societal benefits. So on the safety side, I was driving over here this evening. They said traffic fatalities that have been around 40,000 nationally have gone down about 2%. And a big part of that is because the vehicles they're building them so much safer, and they're building in this advanced driver system technology, which is actually reducing crashes, and it's reducing the impact when there is a crash. So when you think about the traffic fatalities, 90% of them are due to human error. So if you introduce automated vehicle technology, it removes the human element, and it can have a really big impact in reducing the traffic fatalities. So safety is kind of the number one reason why we even want to think about it. And then you start thinking about the rural and small urban communities. So they have 19% of the population, but they have 49% of the fatal crashes. So that's a really important reason why we should look at communities like White Bear Lake. And then related to increased mobility, again, if you look at rural and small urban areas, they have a disproportionate number of senior citizens and people with disabilities, those that are really unable to drive. So our pilot is really trying to target those individuals that don't have the opportunity to just get in a vehicle and get to where they want to go. And then when you look at societal benefits, a big piece is connecting people to their community. So really reducing that social isolation and making it accessible, that transportation. A unique feature of our pilot is this education and workforce development. There's been discussions at the national and international level, but I think we're unique because we actually have a program that we want to lay out and start implementing it, and it's going to focus on emerging technology, connected and automated vehicles, and how we can start building that workforce for that technology that's coming. Next slide. And a couple of winters ago, I had the opportunity to work with MnDOT, and some of you might have heard about this automated shuttle bus that MnDOT was testing to see how does it perform in winter weather operations. And actually it did pretty well in the different pavement conditions, but when you got into heavy falling snow or blowing snow, there's still some challenges to be worked out. The good thing is the manufacturers are developing new sensor technology. They're integrating multiple layers of sensors, and they're improving the software that actually operates the vehicles. So they're actually making them perform a lot better in different weather conditions like snow. When we completed the testing, it occurred at the controlled test site up at Minroad, kind of the Albertville, Monticello area that MnDOT uses, focusing on pavement testing. But we really wanted to do more winter weather testing, and we've kind of laid out the pilot here to capture all four seasons, so that'll give us more opportunity to do the all-weather testing. The other thing, there was an interest in actually taking it out of the controlled environment into a public road, and that's what we want to do with this pilot. Next slide. So a big part of MnDOT's project was public outreach and actually doing public demonstrations. And they had probably about 3,000 people that had the opportunity to ride the automated shuttle when it was here. And a big event was in downtown Minneapolis. It was around the 2018 Super Bowl. There was basically a block set off to offer rides to the public so they could experience firsthand the technology. So look at some of the public comments. Thank you, City of Minneapolis, for setting up events like this to help the public experience future growth projects. This was really fun and enjoyable. I can't wait to see more operational in Minnesota. Hurry up and get these things in our city. Can't wait for the future. we had a large group of individuals that were part of the Minnesota chapter, National Federation of the Blind. They came and they took rides on the shuttle. And they were so positive, they said, we can't wait for this technology to get here because it's going to really enhance the quality of their life. Next. So the other thing we wanted to make sure the pilot aligned closely with MnDOT's goals and really the whole statewide program for connected and automated vehicles. So in late 2018, the governor's Connected and Automated Vehicle Advisory Council produced a report that basically laid out the direction for the state. So a couple areas in their key recommendations was related to accessibility and equity, and then economic development, business opportunity, and workforce preparation. And we kind of highlighted in the red boxes how the White Bear Lake AV shuttle pilot aligns with their recommendation. So it's focusing on doing a pilot in a suburban area, targeting the aging populations, persons with disabilities, low income, investing in connected and automated vehicle training and workforce development, promoting it and educating the public, modernizing workforce and apprenticeship opportunities, developing programs for state educational institutions to develop training for drivers, operators, mechanics, those that will be impacted by the new technology that's coming. Next. And then the University of Minnesota Humphrey School, they did a study earlier this year that really set the framework for the pilot. And they went into this understanding that most of the pilots were occurring in the urban areas, but there's definitely a need when you start looking at the rural or the small urban areas. And really, there's a great opportunity to provide benefit to residents that are unable to drive due to age or disability. And so what the university did was they tried to come up with different scenarios and a justification on why would a city like White Bear Lake want to possibly deploy automated vehicle technology to the public. And go to the next slide. So when they started, they laid out sort of criteria. Okay, what rural area or smaller urban community do we really want to focus on? So they set up some criteria to do a screening, and it looked at population. Is there community support? Would the pilot serve, seniors, or maybe the disabled community? Is there maybe a short pilot route that could be identified? And White Bear Lake was one of the small urban areas that fit perfectly with the criteria that got laid out. So I know there was a lot of outreach that was conducted by the university and by Ellen earlier this year and the other partners with the project, but it really got the ball rolling on really thinking out the concept and try to get it moving further along. Next. So I'm going to cover the project concept, give you a better idea what it's all about. So look at the list of agencies. It's a pretty impressive partnership. We met with MnDOT late August, and we presented the concept to them. And they said, you have the record for the most partners that are attending the meeting, and they were pretty impressed on what was put together here. It's a nice mix. You've got the city leading the effort. You've got the chamber, one of the project advocates. You've got the academia involved. You've got some technology experts that are mixing in. You've got New Tracks, who's going to be our shuttle operator that's going to actually operate these vehicles. And then they've got some strong partnerships with agencies like PAI. Next. So this was a goal that we laid out in our proposal to MnDOT. We basically said we want to conduct a 12-month AV shuttle pilot in all weather operations, including accessibility for the disadvantaged, AV education and workforce development, and ultimately allowing MnDOT use in replicating AV paratransit systems throughout the state of Minnesota. Now, we say 12 months, and that's because we want the shuttle here for at least 12 months so we can capture the 4 seasons. But the program we've laid out is actually 24 months because we've included the workforce development component. I'll show you actually some maps of the actual route, but we're excited. It does include a traffic signal, and it includes a 4-way stop as well. And we like that because it gives us an opportunity to test with MnDOT connected vehicle applications, and that's where the vehicle can actually communicate with the traffic signal and vice versa. So that's an area that MnDOT is really interested in working on. So we're excited to tackle that as well. Next slide. So maybe some of the more key features are it's going to be a full electric shuttle. So this is actually a photo of what was up at Min Road 2 winters ago, and it's actually sitting on a sheet of ice. It was one of the tests we had set up. One of the important features is going to be the ADA accessibility. We want to make sure whatever we get here in the city is going to have a mobility ramp, and it's going to be ADA compliant, and we're going to have the ability to do tie downs on any wheelchairs that might be in the vehicle. The other thing we've incorporated is public demonstrations. We know that's going to be an important piece. Expose it to the citizens here and really get that support for additional operations. Next. This is really exciting, the whole education and workforce development program. So we want to integrate into the school district and the Century College programs that are already in place. So we see it as a mix of some classroom education focusing on automated vehicle technology, and then actually doing some hands-on research, testing, and training. And we have an idea for a certification program. So NewTrax will serve as the operator. So they have to be certified, go through the safety procedures, know what to do in case the technology is not operating. But we also said, well, why don't we expand that certification to like an internship program, maybe some opportunities for seniors or even the disabled community, and then expand it to private and other public sector internship programs. So that's something we're going to be working on as part of this. Next slide. So high demand for skilled workforce in the automotive sector. This kind of describes the situation that we're in and is coming. The automotive service technician career is projected to need over 13,300 new technicians to meet the market demand between 2016 and 2026. So we're fortunate to have White Bear Lake Area Schools Innovative Career Pathways program already established. They have a nice strategic partnership with Century College. We're going to be able to take advantage of that. We want to incorporate the automated vehicle educational component and actually the shuttle, bring it into their educational programs. And, you know, with the Century College, we're thinking it would be a nice fit into the automotive and the IT diploma programs. The other thing, University of Minnesota Center for Transportation Studies expressed interest. So they're one of the partners. They want to actually get some of their students that are involved with research to have some hands-on time with the shuttle when it's here in the city. Next. So then you think about the top leadership of our state. So Governor Tim Walz, he was speaking in July at the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce. So he was asked the question, is it a priority for you in the state of Minnesota for high schools to develop innovative career pathway programs to give students more options to enter the workforce after high school? His answer was, when I hear of these pathway programs, they're working exciting. So we think we're going to have support all the way from the governor with what we've laid out here for this pilot, which is pretty exciting. Next. So there's a lot of different partners. I know we can't go over this information on the slide, but we tried to color code it on roles that the different partners would have. So we've got the leadership of the city. We've got the Chamber of Commerce and the Community Foundation that are really going to be project advocates for community support. We've got NewTrax, who will be our AV shuttle operator, and they've got a strong partnership with PAI already and are providing service for the Community Day program for adults with disabilities. We've got White Bear Lake School District, Century College, University of Minnesota, CTS, and the Minnesota Transportation Center of Excellence that are going to be focusing on the education and workforce development piece. And then we've got the White Bear Area Senior Program, YMCA, and Northeast Contemporary Services are all going to be promoting this as a transportation option to those that are taking and are involved with their programs. University of Minnesota Humphrey School is going to help us with some of the evaluation, especially trying to get some public input on what their experience was like and what they think of the technology. AACOM will serve as the program manager. And then Ramsey County is going to be involved because of the traffic signal we have along the route. And they'll also give us input into the workforce development program. Next. So I want to talk about the project location. So we like the location of the site because it's located nicely within the region. So you got nice regional access, right? Next slide. So we're kind of in the southern part of the city, right? The other thing we like is you've got Highway 61 that's just to the west. It's going to have a future bus rapid transit program called the Rush Line that they're looking at. So we will have nice opportunity to provide a first last mile connectivity to that future BRT route. Next slide. So this is really zooming in on the pilot. So we're actually, it's a 1.5 mile route. We're just south of County Road East. You can see where New Tracks is located. So that's actually where we're going to store and charge the electric AV shuttle. We would start the route at PAI on the northern end. It's going to proceed to Boulders, which is a senior facility. It's going to then make a stop at Willow Woods Apartment, which is a low-income senior living facility. And then it's going to proceed down Willow over to Orchard Lane, all the way over to the YMCA. So that's going to provide a nice connectivity to other community programs for those that are disabled or the senior citizens. We like the route because it's low speed, it's low volume, it's not very complex, it's very predictable, and you know, we've got the stop sign at Elm Street, we've got the traffic signal at White Bear Avenue. Like I said, we like the opportunity to test that out as part of the pilot. White Bear Lake Area High School is just off of McKnight. So not only do we want to do the 1.5 mile route, but we actually want to program a route at the high schools to allow the students to get some hands-on education. So when it's not in service, it'll be available to the high school. Next slide. So this is just kind of a repeat. The other thing along the route, we have the Willow Lane Elementary School. So what a great opportunity to expose the technology to those in elementary school. So we see that as a nice opportunity. Next. The timing of this is great. AECOM, we do a lot of work nationally, internationally. We are a very large transportation infrastructure firm involved with design, build, operate, and maintain. Our company is always pushing innovation. One of the programs we're leading right now is called the Automated Bus Consortium. It's a national program. Go to the next slide. We've got 12 transportation or transit agencies spread throughout the country that are involved. We're not doing shuttles, but we are looking at deploying full-size, full-speed, accessible automated buses in a variety of geographies and applications. The nice thing about that is we can leverage the lessons that are being learned under this program and bring them here to this pilot. Go to the next slide. This is just an example. So we're laying out requirements right now. How would the bus or how would the shuttle interface with a traffic signal, right? It needs to identify, is that signal green or is it red? It needs to identify what's happening around me. Are there other vehicles? Is there pedestrians? Is there bicycles? So we're laying out the requirements right now as part of that national program, and we're going to be able to bring that here. Next slide. And again, this is a four-way stop application, and we're going to be able to do the same thing here. The only difference here is now that bus has to identify, oh, was there a vehicle that approached that intersection first, so I need to give that vehicle a right-of-way. Next. Let's talk a little bit about the process and kind of the task. Next slide. So the way we've laid it out is kind of two phases. So phase one is actually the pilot. So that is the funding we are seeking right now from MnDOT. And ultimately, we have a phase two as the vision, because we want the pilot to go through it. If it's successful, we're going to proceed with actual procurement and actually continue an ongoing program. So we've already we're doing task one, task two, we're seeking the funds. Once we get funding, we're going to finalize up the requirements, and then we're going to do a solicitation to bring the technology partner on board, a company that would actually provide the shuttle to us. And then we'll set up whatever infrastructure we need on the route. We'll go into operations and evaluation, and then concurrently we'll have the education and workforce development program going on. And then we'll mix in public demonstrations throughout the year when we have the shuttle here. The idea with phase two is New Tracks would actually acquire through the partnership, say 1 or 2 or even 3 of these vehicles and look at an opportunity to supplement their fleet and provide it as an ongoing service. And then we would continue with the education and workforce development program as well. Next. This is just our schedule. So we submitted last week a proposal to MnDOT. We should find out middle of November whether we were successful or not. If we are, we should get going early 2020. We'd probably spend the first half of 2020 finalizing requirements, getting our AV shuttle vendor on board. And then we're thinking it could happen in even the summer or at the latest the fall. We would actually put the shuttle into operation, test it out for the 12-month period. The education and workforce development piece could start immediately in January. And then depending on funding, we could get into the phase 2 of the program. Next. Go ahead, next slide. So just the merits and value, kind of the uniqueness is, we're targeting mobility for those that are unable to drive. Just look at opportunities to improve their quality of life. We also want to establish that education and workforce development piece. And that's a unique thing because we're not seeing that happen anywhere else in the country right now, specifically talking about automated vehicle technology. And then we have an opportunity to take the technology in a public road, do some additional testing. And we want to really establish a framework that would allow the state to replicate and duplicate this thing in other small urban and rural communities. So I think that's the presentation. And just some rest. I think the big piece is funding. If we don't get the funding, we can't continue to move forward with the program. So with that, I'll take some questions if there are any.
Anybody? Good. Ms. Heinecker.
If I could just add, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for the presentation, Daryl. I wanted to also point out that we have had a couple neighborhood meetings. One was held at the YMCA and the other at Willow Elementary School. And it's Councilmember Engstrand's ward, so he attended both of those. And I know we had some other attendance from council members. But, we had some questions about the speed of the vehicle. And that was really the primary question, really. If a car gets behind it, how do they navigate that? Because it isn't going to go as fast as a regular vehicle, probably about 20 miles an hour. But I think we were able to talk through those questions. But other than that, there was enthusiasm, I would say, unless Councilmember Engstrand had a different way to characterize it, but we felt really good about those meetings. I also wanted to add, I was remiss in pointing out that we have Frank Duma here from the University of Minnesota, Humphrey Institute. It was really Frank who was here, I think, about a year ago before the council to talk about his work with AV and the work that you've been doing. And as a result of that, that's rolled out into really where we're at today. So, and Frank would continue to be involved in this if we're successful in getting the grant. 2 more things I wanted to clarify. The city's role really is to serve as the lead agency, so we would be the recipient of the funds and then would help to disperse those and navigate the contracts. The project management would then be taken on by AECOM, Daryl and his team. Just to clarify, to this point, AECOM has been donating their time to put this together, and we'll see where we go with the grant. And lastly, I know an important question that the council had asked when we started talking about this some months ago was liability. Everyone, and we all in our committee were like, well, who's going to carry that on? But that would be the responsibility of the vendor. So we were able to clarify that and would be one of the requirements. And important to add that, unless it was already said in the presentation, but the vehicle would always have an attendant. That is required by state law, and it would also be at our that's what we would want anyhow. So there will always be a certified attendant in the vehicle in the instance that there were some need for a person to interact with the technology. But that's an important point to highlight.
And then one other thing was we are seeking other funding opportunities as well. And I know Century College recently submitted a grant application to the state and local grant partnership. And if we're successful there, that would help seed some of the workforce development work that we want to do under our pilot.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you, Madam. So that was my question. Who are we? Maybe you covered that. Who are we asking for money? What's the pot of money you're looking at?
Yeah, so MnDOT has a program called the CAP Challenge. Basically, they're looking for innovation and for partnerships to come in with an idea that could help advance connected and automated vehicle technology in the state of Minnesota. So they have an open solicitation. So we submitted last week. The next opportunity would be like middle of January. But they have roughly $3.5 to $4 million per year available for that program. So we had an initial meeting with MnDOT. They seem to be really interested in the project. So we made a decision that we should submit a proposal to them.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. We've got a
Thank
lot
you.
to digest. You gave us a lot of information, so
Thank you.
we'll wait to see how the grant proposals turn out.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Next, we will move on to 5A, resolution adopting assessment roll for 2019 street reconstruction projects 1901 and 1906. Mr. Copy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. If we all remember, we opened the public hearing for the 2019 street rehabilitation project at the October 8th council meeting. We had to continue it to tonight due to re-notification of several properties due to a couple clerical errors on the assessment roll that was sent out. So tonight we'll be continuing that hearing. Just as a reminder to council and the audience, that a public hearing is required by statute 429 to adopt the assessment for the project, and official notice was sent to all affected property owners along with notification in the local newspaper. So just as a reminder to everybody that residents can appeal their assessments. It's a two-step process. The first would be to, by the end of the council meeting tonight, submit a written objection to the assessment for council to consider. And within 30 days following the adoption, if council adopts the assessment roll tonight, they have 30 days to appeal at district court. So it is a two-step process that is required to actually appeal their assessment. Just as a reminder as well, the assessment, the interest rate set for the assessments this year is 4.41% and would be at a 15-year term for single-family residential homes. So as far as the written objections, considering the ones that were submitted at the previous council meeting, as well as those that have been received since, we have a total of 6 objections that were received. I put those on the DS for you all to review. 5 of them were for basically corner lot alley assessments that were first brought up at last year's project and council considered. The 6th objection was for a water service assessment that we heard from the property owner at the October 8th meeting, and that was for a water service that was needed to be separated along with their neighbor who had a single service. We separated it so they each had individual services. With that, staff would recommend that council continue the hearing and consider adopting the assessment roll this evening, or the consider. I get tongue-tied. Consider the resolution adopting the assessment roll for the 2019 street rehabilitation project.
Thank you. Council, any questions for Mr. Copy before I open it up? Seeing none, I will open it up to the public hearing. I see I have 2 people that have signed up to speak. So if Mr. Mao or Mr. Kuhl want to come up, now's your opportunity.
Hello, my name is Barry Kuhl. I live at 4830 Johnson Avenue. So I'm really not going to say anything new. It's just, my interpretation of the statute is that, excuse me, the benefit of the assessment has to be based on the benefit received, and those of us on the corner lots do not receive the same benefits that the people that have garages and driveways on the alley. So we don't feel our assessment should be the same as the people who actually use the alley. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. And I sent an email to some of you about, another option of perhaps weighting the assessment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mao.
I'm going to forego.
Okay. Is there anybody else? If not, I'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the council for deliberation. Councilmember Bean.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a few questions for Mr. Coffey. What came first, the alley or the residence?
In most cases, that's the way the properties were platted, the homes were built, not knowing or not looking at the complete history of every project of, at one point in time, the garages may have come off the alley. They changed statutes. Ms. Kane can speak as well to recent projects where homes or corner lots have been rebuilt where access has come off the alley, things like that. So the alley continues to serve as an option for future redevelopment of any of those parcels.
Okay. And then can alley residences normally access the street if desired, or do they normally access the alley, or how does that work?
I'm going to turn that over to Ann to answer.
Yeah. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Bean, the zoning code does stipulate that corner lots that have an alley are required to have the garage accessing the alley unless agreed to by, I believe it says the community development director or the zoning administrator, I forget the term, that an alternative design is preferred.
Okay. And then is the alley legally associated with the property?
Yes, it's in these cases it's platted right of way, so it acts just as a street out in front of the house.
Okay. And again, whose decision is it whether or not to use the street or the alley for access? I mean, would the city have told people that they have to use the street?
The zoning code, no. The zoning code that's been adopted by the council stipulates that the garage shall access the alley unless agreed to otherwise.
Anybody else?
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh.
Madam Mayor, what's the remedy? I mean, let's say the objections prevail. I mean, we as a city, as residents of the city taxpayers, we're going to pay the contractors. We're going to pay for the work. It's just a matter of how we divide it, right? I mean, so correct. What would the remedy be if these challenges prevail? Would it be just the other folks on that alley pay more, or the rest of us pay more, or the whole project? How do you think that would go?
I think.
Maybe the city attorney has a better answer.
I think he could answer.
Direct
yes,
that to
please.
me, please.
Mayor and council member, the judge has some flexibility on how that's ordered. Judge can vacate the assessment. There are the times where I believe I've recalled courts essentially punishing cities for messing this process up so poorly that essentially the city eats the cost, and so therefore the taxpayers end up paying it. Judge also has the option to send it back to the city for a reassessment, so the city could go back based on the directions of the orders from the court and reevaluate and reassess. So there are different options there. Someone ends up paying. It's either the taxpayers generally or the property owners. There usually is not a reassessment of the entire project. So there wouldn't be a reallocation of any amount back against the remainder of the folks through the assessment process. It would be a taxpayer.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this might be a question for the city attorney. We have individuals who have objected. Does the city make a determination? Does the council make a determination about the merits of the objection, or is that solely in the purview of the court to which the objectors must also apply?
Sure. Madam Mayor, council member, the city council does have the authority to evaluate the objections raised and make a determination of whether or not the city wants to make adjustments to the assessment based on the objection. The concern or the issue that the council faces, frankly, and is one that I believe I mentioned last time, is the idea of assessing
consistently across and applying your policies consistently. So if you were to deviate, you would frankly need to have some fairly good reasons why you would deviate for one property and not the others. So like on the alley assessment, for instance, I understand this is a policy the council had adopted in the past and has applied consistently. So if you were to deviate from that, you would need to make specific findings as to why you were doing that. Otherwise, you run the risk of essentially jeopardizing the consistency or the validity of the assessment with respect to the other properties. So you do have some discretion at this level, but it has to be exercised in the context of that uniformity that I talked about. Now, again, when it goes to if it goes to the district court, the judge certainly has the discretion to make up his or her own mind as to whether or not you follow proper procedure and whether or not the special benefit was essentially in the city's favor in this case, that you adequately found a special benefit that at least equals or exceeds the amount of the assessment.
Please.
So we have not had this policy in place for a long time. It does not have a long history of practice in this community. I believe it has been consistently applied during the short period of time that it has been in place. I think my personal assessment is that we are learning some things about the uniquenesses and vagaries of alleyways, and that given the historic nature of the places in the community where we have alleys, that there is uniquenesses that may not have been considered in the first drafting. So if the council were to, let's say, I'll offer two scenarios. So the first one is, if we were to take up consideration of the objections and made a determination, as we have the authority to do, that we may or may not have considered nuances in equal and appropriate application of the statute, then we are at risk potentially of others because we would be changing the assessment. We would be opening ourselves to at least some liability from others about operating a policy that has not been uniformly applied. Okay, so that's a legal jeopardy for us potentially. So to do well in one sense undermines others. Okay, got that. What if after the assessment, after this set of objections are dealt with and this year's project is done, we were to implement changes in the policy? Do we then incur additional back liability for interpretations that were uniformly applied in previous years prior to a change in policy, or are we stuck with this sucker for as long as we all shall live?
Right. Madam Mayor and Council Member, that's a good question. In my opinion, the Council has the discretion to reconsider its policies moving forward, consistently applying the policies that you have in effect. But no, in my opinion, you're not forever stuck with it, as you put it. I think you can evaluate, reevaluate, and make a determination that moving forward, based on our experience, that we as a council decide that this policy ought to be changed. And once you change it, then of course you consistently apply it moving forward until further changes are made. Is there a potential that someone could object that that's not fair? You've now essentially changed the rules after I've been assessed. Yes, I mean, that objection could be raised, but frankly, I'm not as concerned about that objection than I am about an inconsistent application of the policy that you have in place.
Thank you. Councilmember Jones.
So maybe City Manager, I'm looking, or Mr. Cowby, last year. So last year was the first year, right? So the second year. I mean, our exposure is limited because of that, was what Mr. Edberg was relating to. Any objections contested? There were objections last year.
Correct.
And I'm assuming, how far did they go in the process, which I fully understand is cumbersome. I'm almost wishing someone would go the distance to see, to test the, are we getting the value of the property, per the state law? But has anybody do we know any results? Nothing went.
There were several objections filed, at the council or at the public hearing level
Regarding alley.
Regarding the alley, none of them went further than that.
Objected, paid.
So they didn't.
Objected, but did not file at district court.
They didn't pursue it to court.
Because the one thing that the one thing that always catches me and is comes down to the zoning, or if you are going to reconstruct that house, if tornado hit your house, took it out, that garage has got to be turned 90 degrees and accessible by the alley. And what bothers me about that is that it's up to interpretation based on one person on our staff. It doesn't seem like that's a variance. Am I correct in that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Jones, that's correct. It's not considered a variance. There's just language that allows some flexibility.
Right. It's applying the code, and it's up to, no offense, Ms. Kane. It certainly seems like a variance. It should be brought to us, Planning Commission. Doesn't that seem, to me it seems odd. I'm not asking the council.
But if it's a code in place, then,
right,
and the place goes, it's like,
right,
it goes away, then you're going to have to apply the code as it's written. So it would have to be turned.
But based on Ms. Kane's.
But that's the code. So she's just interpreting what's written down. If it's saying that the thing has to be, but we're deviating here.
I think that needs to be addressed. If we're going to continue this same policy, it is not consistent. There is a way that I can deviate from this, which gives me pain, and looking at these folks and going, yep, you. In my opinion, based on our policy, based on what we've done, based on what's been established, I am sorry, I have to assess you the full amount. Whether or not you ever take care of, benefit from that, because your garage is going to stay in place the way it is and you're going to be accessible by the street, knowing that if they wanted to, they could change it.
Well, our future owner could. The next owner. I mean, there's that piece too. So.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor.
I'm sorry, but
no, I don't. I haven't got nothing. I mean,
Councilmember Edberg.
Just 2 points. One is the reason most folks don't take their objection to court is that the cost of court is likely more expensive than the cost of
paying the assessment.
Of the assessment. And that strikes me as unfair. It places power in our hands to assess people knowing that they will lack the resources to contest us. It places greater urgency in my mind on the council taking up this as a policy question, changing the code if necessary for the future. And we've talked about it for 2 years. It's time we put it on a work agenda for the coming year before we enter into assessments for the coming year.
Thank you. Councilmember Bean.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I don't know who I would address this question to.
We'll figure it out.
If we were to change the assessment for the corner lots, depending upon the corner lot had a driveway that accessed the street or accessed the alley, is that something we can do right now for all of them, or can we only act on the ones that have objected?
If you do it, you're going to have to be uniform in that, and you're going to have to do last year's also.
So.
Yeah, you're going to have to go. If you're going to.
We're vulnerable. We don't have to, but it makes us vulnerable.
So another question on top of that, then, do we know how many corner lots are involved altogether with our alley reconstruction, and how many of them have street access versus alley access?
We have some tally. We kind of looked at some of the corner lots. For this year, there were 14 corner lots that did not use the street for access, so they used the alley for access. There were 9 that used the street for access.
Okay.
One thing to note too, that even with that, there are homes that don't necessarily have a driveway that faces the alley, but they use the alley or that area between their garage and alley to store boats. They drive across the alley to park their vehicles in their driveways that face the street. They have garbage cans that they store along the alley between the garage and the alley. So there are other uses for that they're taking advantage of as well. The other thing to note, Ann and I were talking, is between last year's project and this year's project is the vast majority of the alleys that we will face under this policy. There's a couple that are left that we did not, we weren't able to incorporate in this year or last year's projects. So we're almost done with it. So, it really affected the 2018 and 2019 projects.
Okay. Okay. Any thoughts, Council?
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve, even though I don't feel, I kind of feel painted into a corner where we're at, and that's our fault as a council. We should have taken it up last year, but with that, there it is, and I want to treat everybody fairly. And it's like, we've done this for 1 year. There's a lot of people last year. With that, I'll make the motion to approve.
Second. All right, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Bean.
I guess just a thought here. When Mr. Copy pointed out that even if it's not used as access for a driveway,
It's used for
it
other
can
things.
be used for other things, and that makes it easier for me to vote in favor of this resolution.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Walsh.
Well, I support the motion, and I'm not sure, I'm happy to revisit the policy in a work session coming up, but I'm not sure I see a better way to do it. I believe the most important point is that future use of the property, we assess properties, not people, not current uses, and I think it's sound and solid. I'm open to looking at a different way to do it, but it seems to be the most fair way to do it. It does catch some people, with corner lots, but there are benefits to corner lots too, so there's value there. So,
Okay. Anyone else? If not, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion carries. Moving on to 5B, resolution establishing the downtown area special services district levy for the years 2020 and 2021. Ms. Kane.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members of the council, back in 1992, the city, in conjunction with Main Street Incorporated, helped establish one of the state's first special service districts that serves downtown White Bear Lake. You can see here on the map of the properties that are included within not only the district, but then the commercial properties that are assessed this additional tax on top of their regular property tax to the city. It essentially, follows the 61 corridor, extends from First Street, up to 9th Street, 10th Street at McDonald's on both east and west sides of 61. State statute does stipulate that a petition needs to be submitted with the city to establish this special service district. It's essentially the business owners, the property owners coming to the council and saying, please put this additional tax on us so that we may advertise our downtown. I think we've all heard the radio holiday advertisements, as well as a portion of the banners and the beautification efforts that go on throughout the downtown area. State statute here in the center stipulates that 25% of the owners of the land area, 25% of the owners of representing the tax capacity, as well as 25% of the tax levy itself. In this case being $45,000 per year that all these properties collectively contribute. And then you can see what the actual petition that was prepared and distributed by the Main Street to all the affected property owners throughout the special service district. There is a formula, a bit complicated, but it's been in place for a number of years, and you can see here on first floor commercial businesses what it is paid per square foot. It's just over 9 cents per square foot on an annual basis for first floor commercial uses. If you have upper story offices or studios, commercial studios, that they pay a portion of just below 2 cents per square foot. And then the properties have a minimum of $135 annual assessment and a maximum 1,600 for the larger properties that have extensive square footage on it. There is one exception for this. This is for the second floor retail tenants in the Avalon Mall who are much smaller, so that they do pay on a per square foot basis. They do not pay the minimum 135. It would just be a disproportional tax if they did. This is the 13th time that Main Street has submitted this petition to the City Council. So that this represents, I believe, for 2020 and 2021, year 26 and 27 of the Special Service District. It's proven to be very successful. Staff is recommending approval of the resolution, but more importantly, Sandy Matzdorf with Main Street here this evening, who is the lead agency that really goes about making sure they get the signature from the affected property owners and taxpayers, is also here. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have of staff.
Thank you. Council, any questions? This is one of these that always interest me, the ones that are willing to tax themselves extra. But I know with this, they're able to do a lot of their special projects and things, and I appreciate all the work they put into this. So with that, Council, any questions?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Sandy. Moving on. Oh, I didn't have a public hearing. Moving on to 5C, resolution establishing and imposing special assessment for the year 2020 with no interest on taxable property within the Birch Lake Improvement District. Ms. Kinsler, are you going to do this one, or Heinecker? Who's doing this?
I'll just give a brief summary. We have actually Steve LaLiberte. I was sorry I got that muffled up. I'm here to speak to it more specifically, but as a council, not unlike the Special Service District in the downtown, there's a group of people who live around Birch Lake who also have decided that they wanted to raise some of their own money through which we actually call a service charge. It's a slightly different statute that was used to create this district per se, and but it has been in place since 2006. And I believe, Steve, this is your first year serving as the representative here before council. So he's come before staff to talk a bit about what they're doing, and I know would like to speak to council about some of their projects. I'll just add that what they're asking for is the council to assess $19,000 to the property owners around the lake, which would amount to about $306 for an annual service charge per property. And then, Steve, if you'd like to talk a bit more about that, that would be great.
Thank you. I'm Steve LaLiberte. I'm at 1387 Highway 96. I live on Birch Lake. I've been there for almost 20 years now. 13 years ago, we had been running an association and going around and knocking on doors for donations to do things for the lake. We got tired of it, and we learned about this tax improvement district, so we created one. And so this is our 13th budget that we've submitted. Our big problem with Birch Lake is it's shallow, and so the weeds grow. And our biggest priority is to operate a harvester. And we essentially mow the lawn in the backyard, if you will, and it makes the lake usable. The pontoon boats go, and it looks nice. And we also stock the lake. We do water quality management and monitoring. We're part of VLAMO, and we participate in their meetings, and just generally do what we can to benefit the lake and the homeowners around it and the people who use the lake and walk around it. Next year, we've got a bit of a challenge in that our harvester's got a leak, and it's 40 years old, so we need to decide what to do with it, and so we're deliberating that now. One of our other big priorities is to try to get a walkway in on Otter Lake Road. When the county upgrades does their upgrade on that road, we really want to be involved. We want to get some community action going. We want a good pedestrian walkway there. And that's it. Any questions?
So, Councilman Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. LaLiberte, do you have you owned your the harvester? Is that an item that is in your physical ownership to use? And
yes, we purchased it, I don't know, 8-9 years ago. for about $30,000, and we've run it all except for a couple years when it was too shallow to get it in. It's one of the challenges we have is we have this piece of equipment that we basically store for 50 weeks out of the year, and then 2 weeks it comes out and does that. So we've got some ideas and maybe some cooperative things with White Bear and Otter Lake and some of the other groups that have need like we do. So we might be able to do something else or get a contractor, and we're looking at all those options.
So I'm looking at if there were another lake in the region that needed to harvest excess weed growth, is that an option that you have experience with, or just something you've talked about?
Yeah, it's something that we'd like to investigate, because certainly White Bear has some weed issues, and so does Otter Lake, and we're all looking at different contractors, and if we could come together to either purchase something together, form some other kind of an entity to manage that, it would make some sense. But that's our primary objective for next year.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, I applaud you with what you do, but promise me next time I get to see. I've never seen the harvester, so I want to see it in action. So let me know when you're doing it.
You may be too late.
I may be too late. But I remember the first year I was mayor and you came in and I wasn't aware of this, and I thought, there's a group of citizens that want to tax themselves extra. But I thank God you do. I really applaud you for the work you do. That lake looks beautiful, and it's a treasure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Council.
Move to approve.
Yeah, we need a public hearing on this. So at this point, I would open up to the public. If anyone wishes to speak on this issue, now would be your opportunity. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back. Now, you were going to...
Move to approve.
All right.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do I have any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Once again, thank you and the other homeowners. Moving on to 5D, resolution certifying delinquent charges related to the municipal utility system assessment. That was a tongue twister. Ms. Kinswater.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, the city prepares quarterly utility bills that we send to property owners. Each property owner or tenant in that property has 35 days to pay their utility bill after the end of their quarter. As of June 30th each year, we take a review of the accounts that have delinquent balances.
Oh, I'm sorry. We take a review of the accounts that have delinquent balances, and we send notices out to all of the property owners and tenants to let them know that their property utility bills are delinquent, and that if they're not paid, they will be certified to the taxes. They have the time to pay. There are a few that in your memo wrote and asked for deferments, and the attached memo, the attachments to the memo kind of describe what their requests were. The city takes the payments in until the end of November, when we have to send the certification to Ramsey County. So at that time, we would like to submit the remaining delinquent accounts to Ramsey County, and we ask that you approve this resolution so that we can make that assessment.
Thank you. Council, any questions? If not, I will open it up to the public. If there's anyone that wishes to speak on this issue, now would be your opportunity. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council. Council.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to 9E, resolution certifying 2019 miscellaneous private property assessment for recovery of city expenses.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, there are certain services that the city pays for private property owners, such as tree removal and some lawn care that they're not taking care of. And then we invoice the property owners for those services. In review of those invoices, we have 6 that were unpaid as of now. Notice was given to the property owners to let them know of their delinquency. They also have until November 30th to make payments on the delinquent amounts. We would like you to consider the resolution to certify any amounts that are not paid by that time so that they will be paid in the 2020 property taxes.
Thank you. Council, any questions? If not, I will open it up for the public hearing portion. Anyone wishing to speak on this issue, now would be your chance to do so. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing, bring it back to the council. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to 8A, ordinance. Reading this. Oh, yeah, it is. First reading of an ordinance amending Article 6 of the Municipal Code by adding Chapter 608, temporarily prohibiting the use of motorboats on East Goose Lake. Ms. Heinecker.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As we discussed at length at our last meeting, the council is aware that the Vadnais Lake Water Management Organization, otherwise known as VLAMO, applied for a grant toward an alum treatment to mitigate significant internal phosphorus loading in East Goose Lake. In order for them to proceed, though, with this alum treatment, VLAMO is requesting that the city enact an ordinance that would restrict motorized boating for at least 3 years. A lot of that information, again, was presented at the last meeting and discussed, and again, in our recent packet. Staff, at the direction of council, we went ahead and drafted an ordinance for consideration, and tonight is its first reading. We have members from VLAMO here that we can present, and I know we did talk at our meeting last meeting about opening up our first reading, which is tonight, for some public comment. Just for a bit of background about our process. So typically what we do when we have an ordinance that's being considered by the council, we have what's called a first reading, which sounds somewhat old-fashioned, but really what it is, it's an opportunity to announce to the public that we're going to be considering an ordinance. And then we would, if the council continues to move forward, there would be a publication or a public notice in our local paper that would notify the entire community that would be considering it and opening it up for a public hearing at its second hearing, which in this case would be the November 26th meeting. This particular ordinance, as we've discussed, there's a lot of, I think, science behind it, and there's a lot of interest that we've already are aware of from the homeowners around the lake. So there was a decision made by council that we would like to open up, not just have the public hearing at its second reading, but also open it up to some conversation with those that are interested in this topic at this meeting. So just a bit of process, but with that, Mayor, I know that members of the VLAMO would like to make a presentation. I don't know if that's how you'd like to proceed first. Okay.
I think that's what we should see, what the proposal is.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm Dawn Tanner. I'm the Program Development Coordinator at VLAMO. And also representing VLAMO with me here tonight is Stephanie McNamara. She's our administrator. And Greg Wilson, who's right over here. He's the engineer with Bar Engineering that did the background research and has been advising on this project for many years. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to provide information to the council and the community. We're happy to be here and hoping to find a smoother path forward with clearer shared understanding with everybody. As we have looked at the challenges and put forth this compromise proposal, we haven't done any of that lightly. We know that there are a lot of strong opinions and values around the lake. The lake is valued for recreational use, and it's impaired for recreational use. That's one of the things that we're seeking to address. So we certainly are working to respect that in the process. And I'd like to say that careful research has gone into every step of the process. This wasn't something that was just initiated. It's been going on for many years. Communication has been continual throughout the process, including numerous stakeholder meetings that began in 2016. There was follow-up in July of 2018 and January of 2019. In addition to formal stakeholder meetings that have been held in the community, there have been separate meetings with stakeholder groups, articles and publications that have been put out. So at VLAMO, we've really been working to communicate about what's going on. The issue of boating and its impacts on East and West Goose Lake aren't new. They were identified during 2011-2012 conversations that worked to build the TMDL. TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Loads, and that is the official document that guides our work and also the Board of Water and Soil Resources and the Pollution Control Agency in working to address the impairment in East Goose Lake, which is our focus at this time. The alum treatment in East Goose is by far the most cost-effective solution, and it's a compromise proposal to protect continued recreation on West Goose while providing an investment in effective action. Next slide. There was a question asked last time about, well, what about East Goose? It's separated from other lakes. The residents like it the way it is. Why don't we leave it? And so we want to begin by highlighting that East Goose Lake is the headwaters for Lambert Creek. It flows throughout the community. It affects individuals in the city of White Bear Lake, in Gem Lake, in Vadnais Heights. It flows through Lambert Creek, and so high nutrient levels in East and West Goose Lake continue to affect the wetlands and the waterways on their way to East Vadnais Lake, which is, of course, the drinking water reservoir for St. Paul residents, and that the water utility is involved in. All of these entities are partners with us and have been working on this project. So it's the most impaired lake as listed by Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. It's the headwaters. It has very high nutrient loads, which have been identified through research and continual monitoring that's been going on in the lakes for many years. It has persistent algae blooms that begin early in the season and persist throughout the season. That was also investigated at the request of Minnesota DNR that we've been working closely with for vegetation management on the lake as part of the plant survey that took place this year. That took place in June of this year, and the algae and a complete devoid lake of plant life was identified, including blue-green algae, which has the potential for harmful algal blooms. And that was another question that was asked, well, what's the risk of doing nothing? The likelihood of future harmful algal blooms and the human health risks that are posed by those. Before I go further, I want to talk about what an alum treatment is. It's applying aluminum sulfate uniformly across the lake so that it forms an even layer on the bottom that binds the phosphorus that's in the water column and from the sediment and traps it into the sediment. So keeping that, allowing that to stabilize is very important. As the alum is first delivered, it forms a fluffy flock on the bottom that is easily remobilized into the water column. It takes time to form a more crystalline structure that then is covered up by a biofilm layer. And at that point, it's fairly stable and resistant to additional mixing. It gets incorporated into the sediment and continues to do its job there. We've done a lot of research on deep lakes and shallow lakes that have had alum treatments. They're not a new technology. Next slide. They began over 50 years ago. The first lakes to have alum treatments were in Wisconsin and in the Midwest, here in Minnesota. One of the peer-reviewed papers that we've leaned on heavily for information because it brings so much literature together and looked at 114 different alum treatments, included 24 alum treatments in Minnesota. We've got a lot of research that we are using to base our decisions and our recommendations going forward. And as we look at the literature and the alum treatments that have been done, we see that especially in shallow lakes, the two primary reasons for limited effectiveness of alum treatments comes from insufficient dosing and disruption of the bottom sediments. Those are two things that we're working very hard to address. Insufficient dosing is because when you do an alum treatment, you have to maintain the pH between 6 and 9. And if you put a whole bunch of aluminum sulfate in there all at once, it will cause major fluctuations in the pH, and that can be risky for fish, life in the lake. So we want to maintain a pH between 6 and 9, so you have to put a little bit of a dose in there at a time. In early studies with shallow lakes, sometimes they stopped it because the pH fluctuated and it never got a sufficient dose. So a lot of research has been done to say, well, if you start the dose in a given year, allow the lake to stabilize, let those pH levels stabilize, let the phosphorus get bound in the system over an intervening year, come back and finish the full dose in the following year. It takes about 3 years then to do the full treatment. That is going to handle the issue of inadequate dosing in an alum treatment. Disruption of the bottom sediments is the other thing we're looking at, and disruption of the bottom sediments comes primarily from bottom feeding fish and boat traffic. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything on these slides. I did want to add that after the alum treatment has begun in a given year, there's careful monitoring in that year following to look at what's happening with the pH, to look at the nutrient levels, to make sure that the alum treatment is doing its job before it goes forward. And why are we all here looking at boat traffic? We're here at the request of the Board of Water and Soil Resources. They have looked at the proposal and feel like it has a very good chance of actually allowing us to delist a lake. And if you know anything about water quality management in Minnesota, delisting lakes doesn't happen very often. It takes a lot of hard work, and Gem Lake was delisted recently, which has been a major success in the watershed and really exciting. So Bowser said, we really appreciate what's been done so far. We feel like this has a really good opportunity of making a difference, and we want you to address the issue of boat traffic on the lake during the alum treatment to protect it to the best of your ability, and that's what we've been doing. The cost for the alum treatment is estimated at $170,000, and that was brought up at the last meeting. Well, how do we know that this is cost effective? Why should we be spending this money on this lake? Is there a better use? This is tax dollars or grant funding. Grant funding is also tax dollars going into it. If we look at the literature says that an alum treatment in a shallow urban lake is 50 times more effective than the next best external load BMP. That means trying to address stormwater coming in from the subwatershed going into that lake. 50 times more effective than the next best non-alum strategy. And as we look at the research that Bar Engineering has put together and the other options that they have recommended to us, this particular alum treatment is 32 times more effective than the next best non-alum treatment available. That's pretty dramatic. So why can't we just fix this by looking at the inputs that are coming in from the stormwater? Because in East Goose Lake, it has kind of a sad history. There's a lot of urbanization that's occurred. There's a lot of stormwater inputs that have occurred. But also, it was the receiving water body for wastewater discharge from the city of White Bear Lake from the 1930s to the 1960s. And that's not the fault of anybody living on the lake or anyone dealing with the lake really today. But that lake has a legacy of pollution that has built up because of it being this receiving wastewater body. It has a lot of phosphorus in it. That phosphorus is in the sediment, and it's continuing to cause problems, especially when the oxygen levels are low, which happens when the algae is high. So we have a lake now that's cycling in a very bad scenario, and it can't fix itself without intervention. We can do everything possible to try to address our TMDL, which actually requires a 91% load reduction. But if we are only working on the 11%, we'll never get there. And if we don't address some of the 11%, we also won't get there, because 91% is more than that. So we need to think about external load and internal load as we work on this. And one thing I wanted to bring up, these waste load allocations or reductions in the nutrients to East Goose Lake is part of the MS4 permitting for the city of White Bear Lake. So there are specific agreements about how much the city is supposed to reduce in phosphorus to be able to meet their goals and to maintain permitting. And that's another important issue to consider. Next slide. So how do we get this done? We know internal loading is a problem because of extensive research that was done in the lake, background literature, but actual sediment cores that were also done to identify that internal load is the primary problem. So we do research in our own watershed. We also consult with the literature. We ask experts, and we look at other lakes that have had alum treatments done in our area, and we ask what they've learned. We know that disruption of the bottom sediments is an important problem, so we have to address bottom feeding fish. I want to mention that most of the areas that have had to deal with bottom feeding fish have focused primarily on invasive carp. According to a prominent carp researcher from the University of Minnesota, no native fish disrupts the bottom sediment like carp. So when we look at our native fish that are in this lake, we have bullhead in the lake. They are bottom feeders. They do disrupt the sediment. They don't do it as badly as carp do. We're really lucky that we don't have a carp problem here, but we do have a lot of bullhead, and we need to deal with that. Vlamo recognized that. In 2012, they did initial surveys and found that there were 80 black bullheads per net. There was a harvest done to remove 16,000 pounds of bullhead to prepare for an alum treatment. In 2017, research was done, a survey was done to follow up and found that there were 22 black bullhead per net. And there were reports of, it looked like, increased numbers of black bullhead. So this year a follow-up survey was done. We don't have the results of that back yet, so I can't share the report with you. It will be coming. We'll share it with you as soon as we have it. But there are a lot of bullhead in there. We will have to address that before an alum treatment can go forward. Also, what we saw, though, they're primarily in the 2 to 4 inch size class. They're very small, and they appear to be, in the words of the scientist that was conducting the survey, food limited. They don't have enough food. They're hungry, even though there's a lot of them, because they're eating algae, and the algae is nutrient poor. Algae doesn't make a good food source for the entire food web. It can also limit the fish community. So people have asked, well, if your recommendation in 2017 was that the fish community seemed to be sustaining itself and you shouldn't need to do additional control, what happened? Why did the bullheads come back? It may partly be related to the algae that's in the lake. It may also be related to winter kill issues. So what do we do forward? We're waiting for recommendations on that report, but we think that continued stocking with game fish is likely going to be a suggested recommendation going forward, and continued harvest of the bullhead. But we can't successfully introduce game fish without any habitat. There are no plants in the lake, as was determined from the survey that happened this summer. With no plants, we don't have habitat for the fish. We can't get a sustaining, healthy fish community. So we need to address that. Next slide. Oh, you're on it already? When we look at motorboats, people have said, well, why look at prohibiting motorboat activity for the 3 years? Because Goose Lake is very, very shallow. Goose Lake is 7.4 feet at its deepest, according to our last 2-meter depth survey that was done, so it's accurate to 2 meters. And if you look at horsepower, this is from the literature, you can see it doesn't take very big of an engine before you have a problem mixing sediment, especially in a lake that's only 7.4 feet deep, which is why we've made a recommendation to prohibit boat traffic for the duration of the alum treatment. Next slide. Impacts of boats have been seen as controversial, and it's true that when you look through the literature, there are a lot of effects that it's hard to ascertain where they come from, especially in large, deep bodies of water. In small, shallow lakes, they're not inconclusive at all. They go back to the 1970s. There are at least 3 major literature review papers, each one looking at more than 100 papers that they've evaluated going through time at about decade intervals, to say that we know that there are a lot of impacts due to boats. In addition to stirring the sediments, they damage the vegetation, they damage the shorelines, they reduce light penetration, which keeps the algae problem in a persistently bad state. And we have these problems on West Goose Lake right now. It's a small water body where the boats do a lot of turning. That's eroding the shoreline. And we've been working with stakeholders, including the ski otters and the boatworks, to work to armor the shoreline so that water skiing and boating can continue on that lake, recognizing the damage that gets caused. We are actually paying for someone for Ramsey County Soil and Water Conservation Division to do a design for that shoreline to armor it. So not to restore it to native condition, because we can't maintain that with continued boating, but we can armor it, work on East Goose where we can make the most impact. Next slide. So those are some general effects due to boats. When we look at the specifics, these are graphs looking at East Goose and West Goose. Our phosphorus levels are the blue line, and the chlorophyll A levels are the orangish red line. If you could click on the cursor and add another line for me, there's a little animation here. Our phosphorus levels, the state standard for phosphorus is 60 micrograms per liter. That line has just been added onto both of these graphs. So you can see, if comparing the blue line now, that both East and West Goose Lake are way above state standard levels for phosphorus loads. But they look like they've been coming down, and people have been asking about that. And we wondered, too, as we got these results back, especially from this year, what do these results mean? We see that East Goose looks like it's coming down, and West Goose looks like it's going up. What's going on? I will address that in just a moment, but I also want to hit, while we're still on looking at the data here, if you could add the cursor one more time. We also have a green line on this graph that shows our chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is a measure of how green the water is, how much algae is in the water. Algae has chlorophyll. That's what produces the green. That's what is being measured with the chlorophyll A. 20 micrograms per liter is the state standard, and you can see that both East and West Goose are hovering at 4 times or more the state standard. That means it's in a persistent algae-dominated state throughout the growing season. So what's going on in these two lakes? If the problem is internal load, why are the nutrient levels coming down? We asked that question also. We talked in our office. We talked with Greg to figure out what's going on. The last 2 years have been some of the wettest years on record. And though that phosphorus is in the lake, there's now more water in it. So it's diluting the phosphorus that's in the lake. The phosphorus is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. There's just more water. But what's going on with West Goose? Well, this is where it's really important to know what's going on in your subwatershed and what different businesses are doing. So Saputo Dairy Foods, excuse me, has reduced their effluent level. They don't release nutrient-rich effluent. It's just warm water that goes in. They release directly into West Goose Lake, and they have reduced to stopped that effluent flow, which means there's less dilution going into West Goose Lake. So we see some differences. And this is also why it's important to not just look at what's going on in a single year, but to look over many years, which is exactly what VLAMO has been doing with the monitoring program. You can advance to the next slide. So we've got 2 lakes that are really sick, and we can see what their nutrient levels look like. But what does, for example, a healthy lake look like? And here we see the exact same graph for Birch Lake, and we ask, well, what does the phosphorus level look like? And if you click, it'll add our state standard just for phosphorus on this graph. You can see that Birch Lake is way below, and the chlorophyll A is also way below, such that it barely even appears on the graph. This is a healthy lake. What does it look like in contrast to Goose? Advance to the next one. It's a clean lake. It has a healthy plant community. It does get some harvesting, as we just heard from Blid, and there are some invasive species efforts, some invasive species that have colonized the lake also, but it has a very healthy native plant community. It has clear water, and this is important because our shallow lakes tend to exist in 2 alternate stable states. Clear water with a lot of plants, or turbid water with a lot of algae. And those are stable states, so when a lake is in one, it's going to be unlikely to switch to the other. East and West Goose are stuck in turbid, algae-dominated states. They're not going to switch without help. Next slide. Here we see our 10-year averages. We also see a sample of a blue-green algae bloom that was documented on East and West Goose Lake in 2013. There have been comments about, well, but that hasn't happened again since then. But we have reports from Ramsey County Soil and Water Conservation Division of blue-green algae that was detected on the lake this year, blue-green specifically, and we know that algae blooms are persistent throughout the season. Next slide. So the nutrient levels appear to have come down. We know now that that's a factor of dilution that's going on in the lake, but the algae population has taken over because it's a stable state in this lake. And blue-green algae, especially some species of blue-green algae, also have the ability to regulate their position in the water column, and this makes the problem even more difficult. During daylight hours, they can change their buoyancy, so they move up to the surface where they harvest light. They grow and reproduce that way. At night, they don't need to do photosynthesis. They go down to the bottom. They harvest phosphorus from the sediment. So they are even more difficult to try to address. Next slide. And toxic algae blooms have become a greater problem over the recent decade. What you see in these graphs is 2010, 2016, and 2019. These are documented toxic algal blooms across the U.S. We can see that they're increasing. Why are they getting worse? They're getting worse nationwide because of warmer temperatures, longer growing seasons, increased urbanization, and probably also an increase in reporting. But they're becoming a much more recognized problem, and so much so that Department of Health and other departments of health are increasing their investigation. The Department of Health in Minnesota over the last 5 years, from 2014 to 2019, has been asking people to voluntarily report human sickness or sickness in their pets that they see. There have been 6 human illnesses, 9 dog deaths, and 4 dog illnesses that have been reported. PCA doesn't get involved in reporting unless a dog gets sick or dies. We had a toxic blue-green algae bloom in our watershed this summer on Pleasant Lake. PCA did get involved because a dog got sick. The dog didn't die, thank goodness, but we were communicating about that. That's in our watershed. This is not an unrealistic possibility. It's not an unrealistic threat. And what's the problem? You can't always see it. So blue-green algae can produce toxins at almost any time, apparently. At least scientists haven't been able to model it, so we don't know the predictive variables. But it can produce it one day and not the next. It can be dispersed by wind currents. And there was a case of a dog in 2015 that got sick and died after swimming in a lake 20 to 30 minutes after it was swimming. The lake looked clean. The owner of the dog said it looked clean. I couldn't see that there was anything in there. But when they did testing, they documented blue-green algae toxins in that dog. That's what caused it to die. Blue-green algae produce 3 different classes of toxins. The toxins cover skin, liver, and the nervous system. They can look like a lot of different things. They can look like an allergic reaction. They can look like overexposure to the sun for the day. They can be headaches, dizziness. Severe symptoms can include damage to the liver and kidney, respiratory paralysis, seizures, vomiting, and diarrhea, but they don't have to be that extreme. So people could be being affected by toxins in the water and not realize it. And the Department of Health is very concerned because these are all acute responses. And they're wondering because they've found that you can actually be exposed to these toxins by breathing in water droplets. So you don't have to be swimming in the water and swallow it. You can be breathing in it by being close to the lake. And these chronic effects are the new topic of research where people are saying, what if you're exposed to this over many years? What are the health effects? We don't know yet. Next slide. So the cost-effective issue has been presented that maybe an alum treatment in East Goose Lake is just too expensive. We know that an alum treatment in East Goose Lake will give us an 800-pound reduction in phosphorus per year. That corresponds to 400,000 pounds of algae removed from the lake per year at a cost per pound of phosphorus of $213. This is 32 times more effective than the next best non-alum BMP. Next slide. Shows us tables of what some of those other options were. So our first best option is the alum treatment in the East Basin, which we've been pursuing. The next best option is an alum treatment in the West Basin. That's actually 4 times more effective than the next best option below it. And we've not been pursuing that nor planning to pursue that going forward because we recognize the value of water skiing and continued boating and the ski show and its value to the community on the lake. Also, we think that working to address the phosphorus in the East Basin will improve the West Basin, also its downstream. And when we look at waste load allocation loads for MS4 permitting, in our TMDL, we have that the city of White Bear Lake is responsible for reducing 72 pounds of phosphorus per year between East and West Goose. In East Goose, that's 64.7 pounds. In East, and in West, it's 7.3 pounds. So we look here at combining our next 3 best options that don't involve an alum treatment. At a cost of $500,000, you will get 60 pounds of removal. You won't meet your target, and it's going to cost a tremendous amount more than the proposed alum treatment. With the alum treatment, we're exceeding the target by 728 pounds of phosphorus. And the costs aren't only in loads. There was a question that was brought up at the last meeting about conflicting statements about property values. Next slide. So who brought this information? Where did they get it? So here's where the information came from. It's from an article in the journal called The Science of the Total Environment, and the paper is Restoration of Eutrophic Freshwater by Managing Internal Nutrient Loads. In that paper, the scientists did their work and found out that 2.2 billion annually is lost as a result of eutrophication, and that's primarily losses due to property value and lost recreational opportunities. Next slide. So Vlamo has been working to find the best option forward. We've got a headwaters problem. We have nutrient loads that are also in our creek. Those nutrients are ending up in East Vadnais, though they're not at this time high. And this alum treatment in East Goose Lake at 800 pounds of phosphorus removed per year is 32 times more effective than anything we can be doing to try to affect what's happening in stormwater management. We are still working on stormwater management. The city has been working with Polar Chev for their reconstruction to get a network of pretreatment, including sand iron filters. We have been working with Bowser and with Bar Engineering on a structure that will be built in the spring also to reduce external load in this area. And we've been working on West Goose on a plan to armor the shoreline to help to protect continued use for boating and water skiing. Next slide. What's the cost of doing nothing? Continued risk of harmful algal blooms that are becoming more severe across the nation and constitute a serious public health risk. There are also negative effects due to this algae that are amplified throughout the food web. The plants can't recover and the lake can't recover unless we do something to help it. The city can't meet their waste load allocations, or if they could, they're going to be met in a much more expensive way. Downstream loads can't be effectively reduced without dealing with the headwaters. And what happens if someone gets sick? In the past, there might have been plausible deniability to say that we didn't realize the risk. I had a woman in the watershed call me about TCE in the watershed and said, would you let your daughter swim in Goose Lake? Which made me wonder, first of all, that she didn't say my child or children. She said my daughter, which meant she'd been doing some research about me. But I said, no, I wouldn't want my daughter swimming in the lake. And it's not a concern about TCE that would bother me. It is the high nutrient loads and the potential for harmful algal blooms. I would not want her to be exposed to them. Thank you very much for hearing our information. There are 2 slides that follow. We don't need to go to them now, but all of the literature that I used tonight is cited here and will be available if anyone would like it. And one final point that I wanted to make about the vegetation work. It's been stated that Vlamo has no plan for vegetation going forward. We started work on vegetation with DNR as of fall of 2018. We have a transplant permit that's been effective since January of 2019. It's good for 3 years. That also identified a source lake for us to work on transplanting native vegetation, but we can't start that until an alum treatment occurs. We also are planning for early treatments of curly leaf pondweed, which is an invasive species that's found in West Goose Lake. It is not currently found in East Goose Lake, but it certainly has the potential to get there. We've been coordinating with the University of Minnesota to understand the timing of treatments for that, but none of it can start without an alum treatment.
Council, any questions? Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the very compelling information on the problem and everything. The one question I don't think you addressed is term. How long? You talk about we can remove 800 pounds of that internal load, which is really valuable. But what can you walk me through the how long it lasts? I mean, that seems to me the rub here is like if everything you just said, if we had to take boats off the lake for a few years to get all that, what you just said, I think I'd be for it. My big question is, how long does it last? And do we have to just do it again in 8 years or 10 years or whatever the term is?
Right. I might ask Greg to talk to this also, but based on the literature on shallow lakes, there is a mean effective life of 5.7 years. And people have said, what? That's really low. That's really low because that includes early treatments that failed. Some of them lasted a month. Some of them lasted less than a year, but we've been learning. So now treatments are lasting more like 10 to 15 years. In the feasibility study that was done for this work, Bar Engineering estimated that it would last 10 to 15 years. And there are similar lakes in the metro that are still seeing positive results 15 and even projected to 30 years out. So there's a lot of really good information that has allowed improvements in alum treatments. And one other thing I wanted to address about other lakes, so people have brought up, well, other lakes didn't control boating. Why? And a lot of other lakes in our area that have had alum treatments that have been successful include Bald Eagle, that has a maximum depth of 36 feet. Spring Lake, 34 feet. McCarran's is one that's projected to maybe last 30 years, 57 feet. Lake of the Isles is a shallow lake, but it still has a max depth of 31 feet. And Coleman Lake was one that was recently cited as another comparable lake. Why control boat traffic? That one has a maximum depth of 12 feet with boating focused primarily in the deepest areas. And it wasn't in as bad a shape. It still had an existing plant community with only occasional algae blooms. So as we're looking at lifetime, the techniques have improved. Dosing is a big piece of that, and stabilizing the bottom sediment is all in an effort to make the alum treatment last as long as possible.
What happens? What's the science over time then? Does the bond doesn't hold, it eventually loosens, and the alum goes free, and the phosphate is exposed again? What's the science of that?
With mixing, it will start to release. It's bound up as an inorganic compound. Over time, that can become bioavailable again. It also will get buried. So in the example in McCarran's Lake, they've done research looking at sediment cores and found that once the alum layer got buried more than 6 centimeters, it stopped working because it wasn't coming into contact with the phosphorus. Greg, is there anything you want to add to that?
Sure. So then it stops working, so it's no longer covering or protecting or...
I think the issue is more that it becomes saturated. There's a slow uptick because the nutrients are still in the system.
Yeah, I'll speak to that question. The alum will combine with phosphorus. That's a permanent bond. It will not release that phosphorus. And the only thing that will change anything is that over time you'll get a new layer of sediment starting to build up on the bottom of each lake that has an alum treatment. So at some point, the alum that has bound up the phosphorus gets covered up by a newer layer of sediment. And so what it does bind up, though, is permanent. That is permanently removed. And it's just a matter of the incoming flow from the watershed continues to drop more newer layer of sediment slowly over time. And once that builds up, that creates a new internal load from the new sediment that builds up.
We're 91% internal, and or you're
88% internal.
88. So, I mean, it seems to me that we're going to let that much more from external come in if we do these other things we've talked about. I guess I'm a little confused as to how it goes away, how it gets that bad again after we take care of the phosphate that's there because of the sewage treatment in the 30s.
Yeah, and I don't think it will get that bad. I mean, that is the reason why we think the success of this will be at least 10 to 15 years or better. And as Don was saying, our understanding of this technology has evolved over time. And so we are doing two major things that we can do to improve the success of this, in addition to the restrictions that we've been talking about here, is that we can get the right dose. In the past, some of the treatments have failed because they were underdosed. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're doing this application in phases. And so that we think that will extend the life of the treatment as well. And then I guess a third thing would be to do some of these watershed best management practices that have also been discussed. So I think those are three major reasons why the life of this treatment will last longer than what's been in the older literature about older projects.
Mm-hmm. Just one more while you're standing there, Greg. Just thinking about other ideas, other options, dredging, so obviously that stuff's in there because of bad practices in the 30s to the 60s, as we talked about. Can we get the phosphate out of there? What is the cost? That wasn't on your slide as one of the other options because it's would be a lot more, but how much more? Can you give us a ballpark on what it would cost to dig it up one time?
Good question. There again, as Don mentioned, Coleman Lake as an example where another alum treatment has been done. It's a shallower lake similar to what we're talking about tonight. Our company did a feasibility study for Coleman Lake to look at the idea of dredging. That was the total cost to do that lake. A shallow portion of that lake was in the neighborhood of $8 million for the life of that project. And then the benefit would have worked out to somewhere in the neighborhood of more than $2,300 per pound of phosphorus removed by doing that. The reason why dredging isn't always that very cost effective is because you will remove phosphorus that's in the layer of sediment that you dredge, but below that layer could be another layer of sediment that also has some phosphorus in it. And so you will still get an internal load from that next layer of sediment below the dredged material. So it may not be as bad as what you are experiencing today. So that's the reason why sometimes dredging doesn't always get you the result you expect. And you're also looking at in this case, something probably in the neighborhood of several $1 million.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Councilman Jones.
Question for Greg. So on your recommendation for the alum treatment, separating it parts, pieces at a time, or is this just you're with Bar Engineering, your engineer with Bar Engineering? Are you up on your own on that, or do you have other folks, agencies that agree with you on the application process for Goose Lake?
On the specific recommendation to do it for Goose Lake?
To separate, stagger.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that has become more common practice and more thought. There's more agreement in that idea of doing that. I think we were the first folks to give that some thought as another option. I think it has already extended the life of some of the treatments that we've already started within the last 5 years. And so, yes, I mean, there are, but nonetheless, there are other people in our practice, in our in our line of work that also believe that this will extend the life of the treatment.
So given the statistics of, everybody's worked a month, failed after a month, or whatever you want to say, as far as the success of 5-point-something years is what you said?
5.7 years.
Right. So obviously, I think this is, alum is, people wouldn't be investing in it. I'm assuming Bald Eagle Lake, entirely different lake, but wouldn't invest in this type of treatment thinking that it would last a very, very short period of time. But it could fail or not do as good a job. I guess is failure. That's my question. What is failure? I mean, it's going to work if it was applied. Something is going to reduce the phosphorus.
It is going to reduce the phosphorus right away. The first thing it does is it settles to the bottom, as it sweeps out the phosphorus that's already in the water to begin with. It takes that to the bottom with it as it settles to the bottom. Then it ties up any other phosphorus that would otherwise come out of the sediment after that.
But what is so it seems like that even in alum treatment, there is no failure. There is not a failure. It does something.
It does something. Yes, it does quite a bit. I will give you an example. We did a treatment on Spring Lake, which is in Scott County. It's a little bit deeper lake, but it was this time of year. The lake was at 280 micrograms per liter, very similar to East Goose Lake, what East Goose Lake has been on average. The treatment took 10 days. At the end of 10 days, we resampled the lake. It was at 50 micrograms per liter. And so that lake has been meeting its water quality standards since we started that alum treatment for Spring Lake. So I can say, and that's despite the fact that it's got an agricultural watershed and half of the phosphorus loading every year is coming from ag land.
Thank you.
Yes.
One more. While they're standing there, you talked about, Ms. Tanner, about delisting the lake as a goal, but I mean, how long does it last? I mean, what would cause it to go back on the bad list? I guess as an impaired water, if let's say we get 10 years, in year 11, what's the threshold for getting it back?
So the approach that MPCA takes when they assess lakes and decide whether or not they're impaired is they look at the last 10 years of monitoring data, and they look at the average phosphorus concentration. Don mentioned the chlorophyll concentration. They've got a phosphorus criteria, a chlorophyll criteria, and a Secchi disc. And so Secchi disc would be a measure of transparency. How far down into the water can you see? If 2 out of those 3 are meeting their criteria, if phosphorus and one of the other ones are meeting the criteria, then it is considered unimpaired. So
over a 10, so it just kind of rolls into.
It's a rolling 10-year average, yes.
I have a question about the restricting the boating. I understand it's a shallow lake, but I drive by that lake at least once a day. I hardly ever see a boat on the lake. Couldn't boating still continue if it wasn't, it's not like they're jet skiing across the lake 24 hours a day. I don't see any boats most of the time out there. Why isn't there some way to come up with some sort of a compromise? I think that's the biggest stickler is the fact that you want to restrict the boating in 3 years. That's pretty severe.
Okay.
I finally silenced somebody. No. Please don't do that. No, I'm not a scientist, so you have to help me.
Right. So, as I mentioned before, we think the recipe to success is to extend the treatment out, do multiple applications. The funding source that Don mentioned from Bowser, the hope is, and by the way, part of why we have done the feasibility report the way that we have done it is to try to satisfy they have specific requirements they want to see met in order to agree to provide funding. So this kind of comes back to Councilmember Jones's question before about success. This is one of the things Bowser is overseeing the clean water funding. Our lottery funds
this is a
go to the
restriction.
Clean Water Fund, and then Bowser disperses those to local folks for implementation projects. They have specific things they need to see, and they want you to provide in terms of quality control. So in order for them to provide funding, they would want some assurance that that alum treatment is going to be successful. And so what we have just said is what we think is the recipe for success. And we want, we don't want this to fail because of a factor that we know that the literature is telling us is a potential source of failure, and that it could be we've got a new layer of alum. We want that to be evenly dispersed, and we want that to cover every square inch of sediment for as long as possible until it becomes inactive after a year's time, where it's no longer reactive with the phosphorus. And so then after that, and that's kind of the reason. So like I said, it's a couple things. We're phasing things out, and it's also that we don't want to cause the alum flock to be moving around and no longer covering the sediment that we want to tie up the phosphorus from. So it's kind of a long answer to your question, or to your statement, more or less. And but that's essentially the reason why we are suggesting this for this particular project.
Okay. Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I have 3 questions. I think you've already answered a couple of them. So what is the net contribution in phosphorus from the headwaters into the long chain? I have no disagreement that it's the headwaters, but what's the actual load impact? Or if you go down to Vadnais Lake, what percentage of the phosphorus coming in from the chain originates in East Goose Lake? You've cited tons of science that says that establishes there's a lot of, but I've been waiting to hear how much of it actually ends up getting into the chain and ends up contributing to the water issue at Vadnais.
There would be isotope marker studies that we could propose to do that would allow us to track specific sources, but no, we haven't done that kind of a study. And we know that East Vadnais is also very healthy. It has a nice buffer around it, a lot of natural area, and water quality is very good. The water utility does do standard tests in August and September when algae blooms are detected in the watershed. They do find an algae bloom in East Vadnais. Toxins are at very low levels, so it's not something that they are treating additionally for drinking water, but it's a future risk.
Okay. So let me go back to Coolman Lake. That's been cited a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. So the assertion that I've heard is that Coolman Lake is a small, shallow lake in a similar geography, not too far down the road, and is a reasonable proxy for East Goose Lake. Fair so far?
Its maximum depth is 12 feet versus 7.4 in East Goose, so that is an important difference when it comes to boating, but otherwise, yes.
Okay. So why... Help me understand. The article written by 4 reasonably qualified university individuals suggests that that system was able to be successful without banning of boating. Help me understand.
I'll try to speak to that. And so, like Don said, it is a deeper lake, so it would be less affected by boating. And the type of boating that we're talking about, I think, is slightly different, too, between the 2 lakes. With the water skiing that we're talking about here, as opposed to over there. The other major thing that's different about Coleman Lake is they also had carp. They did have carp, whereas East Goose Lake didn't have that. So there was also they also needed to remove carp from the system
situation.
Yeah, right. But then the alum treatment over there followed that aspect of the restoration as well.
So in the data that was shown with regard to the impact of motor vehicles, 5 feet is less than 2 meters, which doesn't strike me as being I'm interested in seeing the slides, so if you would make sure that the proposal is available. And do we also have access to the feasibility study that was done for this project?
The feasibility study is posted on our website. It's also been part of a dedicated East Goose page. The presentation that I did to the Vlamo board, also with all of the literature cited, is there and available, and these slides will also be made available. Most of the literature in this one was also cited in that one.
Cool, thank you. So I'm trying to understand the logic in back of why we are armoring West Goose Lake and inflicting, which I don't think it has very many individual owners, residences on that lake. Why are we armoring that one and proposing to inflict other curtailments on residents in East Goose Lake? I mean, we're essentially inflicting challenge on individual residents and not the places where there are no residents. Help me understand the logic.
Well, on West Goose, where there are no residents, is also where the ski team practices and where they have their ski shows, where Cabin 61 is, that has a lot of co-owners that also have property around the lake, so there's that piece. East Goose is a much larger lake than West Goose. The amount of nutrients that are in East Goose is larger. When we look at our load reductions, we're looking at 800 pounds of phosphorus that we can bind and trap and remove from the system in East Goose, where we would have the potential to do 100 pounds in West Goose. West Goose is also downstream from East Goose, and in the feasibility study, one of the problems that needed to be addressed in West Goose was internal load coming from East Goose. So we're trying to choose the most effective solution. Addressing the problems in East Goose allows us to improve the situation in West Goose. And recreational use is something that we are respecting, and so we're working to allow that to continue on West Goose.
So are all of the 100 pounds in West Goose coming from East Goose? So I'm just trying to understand.
I'm deferring to Greg because he has decades of experience on this.
We have East Goose that has supposedly 800 pounds, go across the little, go over into West, and we only have 100 pounds. Is that an actual comparison of how much phosphorus is in there, or is that more a reflection of how much can be bound by alum?
It's a reflection of how much is the 800 is what's affecting, is coming from East Goose, what's affecting East Goose. The 100 pounds is what's coming from West Goose and affecting West Goose. So they're not, but while the one flows to the other, so not everything is completely independent. But the load that then, so we're talking about how the sediment from each of the respective lakes affects the respective lake water quality in each case.
And has that
so 800 in the east, 100 in the west.
Got it. And has that relationship been stable over time?
We think so because of the fact that the in-lake phosphorus concentrations have been fairly stable over time.
So if the phosphorus from East Goose Lake is finding its way into West Goose Lake, why is the level of in West Goose Lake not going up? I mean, you've got an 8-to-1 gradient. You would suggest that if water's moving over, you're going to be growing substantially. I'm trying to understand the flow.
Right. I guess I wouldn't confuse phosphorus load in pounds with a concentration. So really, it's the concentration that leaves East Goose. As you saw before, Don had a slide, about 236 is the average concentration, and it's a little bit less than that in West Goose. We think that to some degree that has been lower in the past because there was a cooling water discharge with very low phosphorus that was diluting that side of the highway.
Okay.
So it's a that's really what you got to take the load and divide it by the volume to get a concentration.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Bean.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, all right, I understand East Goose is the headwaters. I understand that a 3-year boating ban is necessary for the in order to receive the grant. What are the consequences if this is not done? Does it only affect East Goose and the residents on East Goose, or do those consequences go downstream because it is the headwaters? And how serious are the consequences?
And to clarify your question, are you saying if the treatment is not successful? Yes.
It's not done. Let's say if we do not ban boating, the treatment won't be done. What happens?
Then you've got what you've got today.
Does it get worse?
No, won't necessarily get worse. No.
So
it would stay at these higher concentrations that we're talking about. Right now, you're about 4 times over the water quality standard in East Goose Lake.
Okay, but not doing this would not make things worse downstream over the long run. It doesn't amplify the problem. It just keeps it the same as it is right now. East Goose is bad, and everywhere else is okay.
It would stay just like it is today. It wouldn't change anything.
We do have wetlands in the system that are exporting nutrients because they're overloaded in the system. They're being expected to do more than their capacity can manage. We're working on a remeander project on Lambert Lake, on Lambert Lake, and that's on Lambert Creek. Lambert Creek has high nutrients. It's also impaired for bacteria. So with that project, we're looking at removing bacteria and nutrient loads. That will be more effective if the alum treatment is done in East Goose Lake.
One other additional question. Sure. What are the odds that it would only be a 3-year ban on boating? That it wouldn't be a permanent one, or, I mean, if we told the folks, yeah, you're going to be able to boat again in 3 years, I could see a possible benefit to that. If it's going to be you can't ever boat, I could see where that's much harsher than a 3-year limitation for a consequential increase in the water quality. So what are the chances that 3 years is going to be it?
I would say the chances are pretty good that would be it, with the expectation that if the lifespan of that treatment overall is in the neighborhood of 15 years, that you might have to revisit that ordinance again in 15 years, to do another round of alum treatment.
All right. I guess if any members of the public are going to be speaking, I would like to have that addressed by the members of the public, their comparison of those 3 years of no boating versus 15 years of good water.
Okay. Councilmember Edberg.
I have one last question. So the presentation referred to commitments of the city to water quality standards, and I didn't understand the linkage you were trying to make there about increasing the cost or changing the options. Can either the city manager, the city engineer, or our guest?
Yeah. The TMDL and the MS4 allocations are not one-to-one, but they're related. The agreements that come from the TMDL influence the permit standards that are established for MS4 waste load allocation loads. And as part of the TMDL, then we have specific load reductions that the city has committed to with regard to East Goose Lake and West Goose Lake. Those are published and part of our TMDL and related to the MS4 permit. So the numbers, would you like to hear the numbers again?
I'm still spinning my head trying to understand the process and what we agreed to, or who did we agree with?
Mayor, Councilmember Edberg, I'm going to actually defer to Paul a bit, although Paul wasn't here when we put that together.
Yeah, he's the new kid on the block.
But I think, Paul, if you could speak to the MS4 permitting process and what city requirements are related to that, because we do have obligations, statutory obligations that are very specific in what we need to outline in our MS4 permitting process. And so within, I'll let you speak to the rest of it. But
yeah, so the municipal separate storm sewer permit that we have, the MS4 permit, requires us to do a number of different things, from water quality to education to good housekeeping for our own, practices, our public works practices, et cetera. So we work with the watershed districts, and I'm not the expert, these guys are, as far as the TMDL for the lake.
Please. We've heard TMDL for 15 times.
Total maximum daily load.
Thank you.
So it's an impaired water. We have to basically go in and do, like they said, additional projects within the watershed, such as, you laid out different ponding options. As we do street reconstruction projects, we would look at, a number of our projects we've done above and beyond, put the infiltration pipes in, looked at other, other opportunities and areas, and like they said, it's a fraction of what we have to actually do at a much higher cost. So as part of the process, we're on the hook to do that reduction to meet those total maximum daily loads.
I do have a printed copy of the TMDL with me today in case anyone would like to take a look at it and flip through.
But when you say we have to do a project, it doesn't have to be on that lake.
It has to be in the watershed that affects that lake. So, so if you look at the watershed for East Goose Lake, so all that water that's draining from around it into the lake, within that area, we have to do those projects to ultimately reduce the amount of phosphorus getting to the lake.
Okay. All right. Any more questions? Well, I think you've answered our question, but I'm sure we'll have more.
I'd like to really thank Greg for being here, too.
Yeah.
He does have decades of experience, and alum treatment is new for Vlamo. This is the first one that we're working on, and he's been leading them up in the metro area for a long time, so we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Okay, now, I know we have someone, Lindsay Carpenter from the homeowners. Oh, there you are. I know you have something to show us.
Yes, I do. Hello, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm Lindsay Carpenter at 1947 Rishworth Lane, and we also have a PowerPoint presentation that will go ahead and get loaded if you just give me a moment. Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members, for allowing us this time to make public comment and talk to you. And I feel like I should start this meeting the same way I did the Vlamo board meeting in June and say, where do I start? There's so much and so much to go over, but I'm going to try my best to be concise and hit the main points here. Talking to you today on behalf of Goose Lake residents. Goose Lake today, I just want to give briefly some background, and I know you've all been hearing from me and had some emails, so I'm also going to try to be concise and not repeat. But basically, my husband, Kurt Carpenter, moved on Goose Lake in 2001. And funny story about that, he moved to 4193 White Bear Avenue, and when he looked at his house, and the house was up for a listing, this is a true story, he walked down to the backyard, saw the lake, walked to the lake, talked to his neighbor next door, Mike Laughlin, who's here tonight, the first water skier on Goose Lake. Talked to him about the lake and put in an offer. He never walked inside the house. This is a true story. So I'm just relaying how much we care about this lake and the property, and that really we value the property and we live here because of Goose Lake. And that's why there's a number of people here today. So Goose Lake today is a beautiful lake. There's 4 ski boats. So just to talk a little bit about the makeup, it's 19 residences. There's 4 ski boats, 4 families using boats. This picture, I just want to comment, and you'll hear from me, that we have watched since 2001 when Mike Laughlin and Kurt Carpenter started skiing on East Goose Lake. We've watched an improvement. We've watched this lake get better. We've observed it firsthand as people that live on the lake use the lake. And the first picture, one thing I had wanted to highlight is that there's a beautiful bird on top of our boat lift. I don't know if you can really tell. But we have birds at Goose Lake like crazy. People are always commenting on our beautiful birds. There's a bald eagle that lives at our house, and there's loons on our lake the last few years. And we've really been proud of that and bragging about that because we feel like this lake is cleaning up. We're seeing these signs. We even have loons, which you hear that loons don't like dirty lakes. So we've been watching it clean up. Go ahead. This graph is coming to you from Vlamo, and Ms. Tanner had the similar graph, but we noticed that she started her graph, I believe, tonight at 2014. So I believe this graph from Vlamo is very important. Just the fact that we're watching Goose Lake get better. These are those phosphorus levels. And our graph we grabbed from Vlamo starting in 2001. And that, like I said, is when Mike Laughlin and Kurt Carpenter started skiing on this lake with 2 ski boats. And phosphorus level was very, very high. And now we have watched it go down and continuously go down, and we've watched it firsthand get improved with 20 years of recreational use. Goose Lake today, and you'll hear from a number of residents tonight, it's really all about family now. It's 4 ski boats. We all have little kids. So like Madam Mayor mentioned, you don't see boats out there that much. Well, we all have little kids, and we're finding we don't get to ski as much, that's for sure. But whenever we can, whenever we have that chance, it's really about family and social tradition and being on the water and that recreational use, and that is why we live on Goose Lake. That's the only reason we live there. The positive thing that has come out of all this is really Goose Lake residents have band together. We are really closer than we've ever been getting together to go over this material, to talk about it. When Vlamo first sent that survey to Goose Lake residents in the spring, that had me hitting the ground running and talking to all my neighbors. And I was overwhelmingly just pleased and happy that everyone was supporting us and kind of coming together. And of course we like you guys using the lake. We've seen it improve. We've seen great things and the recreational use, and we feel it's a great thing for our property value. So it's brought up great positive conversation, and the neighborhood has really bonded together. So I want to make 3 main points, 3 key points from the Goose Lake residents tonight. After poring over everything and reading literature, being at Vlamo meeting, number 1, alum treatment is not the right fit for East Goose Lake. That's the first point we want to make. Second point, if alum treatment, do not need to remove boats. And finally, if you remove boats, this is going to devastate our property value. Why is alum treatment not the right fit for us? Everything we've heard is that it's a temporary fix and it's a maybe. And this comes from the Vlamo meeting that I was involved with, and I spoke, and Ms. Tanner had her presentation, and there was a long conversation about how it was a temporary fix, it was a maybe. It might help water quality, it might not. And the years of the range they were talking at that meeting was with a shallow lake, 4 to 5 years, 4 to 5 years maybe. And it's very expensive, and you have to repeat it. So that's a concern. I actually have the application that was submitted to Bowser, BWSR. So the grant application from Vlamo to Bowser. And they're actually asking for $190,000 at this time with a city match of $47,500, according to this grant application. And there will have to be repeat. So it's a question of this is not a long-term solution, and it's very expensive. There's also other factors to consider. The bullheads, the dirty fish, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The runoff. We see that our lake does look dirtier when there's rain. And most people who look at pictures of the lake go, well, Highway 61 goes through your lake. So can understand that runoff can be an issue. And there is external loaders. We're concerned because alum is actually putting more toxins in the lake. This comes from literature that we poured over and a number of articles that alum is a toxin, and you are putting more toxins in the lake. So we have a lot of questions about that. We also feel this would eliminate options in our future. And there are options, and I'm going to go over those in a moment. And if the alum treatment goes forward, you won't have the option of dredging, is our understanding, because it will bind to the bottom, and then that option of dredging is out. Same with some aeration ideas. So we feel like this is taking away options. And then weeds. Weeds will be a major problem. If the alum treatment goes forward on East Goose Lake, it will become a swampland, and there really is no plan for that. And I heard Ms. Tanner mention tonight that, well, they talked about treating some curly weed and getting a permit from DNR, but no, where is the plan with the extensive weeds that are going to happen? How much money are we talking? Who's paying? There's a number of issues there with the weeds. And there are other options. We would like to work together with Vlamo as a partnership, as we always have. And I just want to give a little background there is, yes, there has been communication, and we have been involved. My husband, Kurt, and I actually have been involved with Vlamo for about 15 years. We let them use our property for the testing because there's no public launch. So they use our property. They use some of the other Goose Lake residents' property to do the water quality testing. We actually used to do the testing ourselves, and then I think Vlamo got more staff, and they started doing it themselves. So we have been involved. We're involved residents. We want to work together, and this is not the right fit. Bullheads are back. Now, this is important because I want to make a couple points. For one, Vlamo headed up this harvest study and got rid of the bullheads, that bottom-feeding dirty fish that's stirring up sediment, and we were really happy about it. It actually went great. We did see a difference and saw cleanup, so we were thrilled. Then at the June meeting, when this first presentation was brought forward at the Vlamo board meeting, I mentioned that, hey, the bullheads, I got bad news, basically. The bullheads are back in full force. And at that time, Vlamo told me, no, they're not back in full force. You're seeing schools of the babies. And I just want to make this point because Goose Lake residents know the lake best. We're there observing it day in, day out. And I said, well, my neighbors are really telling me the bullheads are back really bad, is what I kept hearing from the neighborhood. So Vlamo did listen to me, which was great, and that's why they ordered the 2019 fish survey, which started in September, October, and a few of us let them use the property to go ahead and do the fish study. And sure enough, unfortunately, it confirmed that these bullheads are back full force and the healthy fish are gone. And these notes, my bullet points, come from the Vlamo agenda and the packet for their board meeting on Wednesday. Other than not good for alum treatment. I did add that one. But everything else is right out of the packet from Vlamo that these bullheads need to be addressed, and I think Ms. Tanner did mention that tonight. And that's where, there's some question marks because, again, reviewing the Bowser grant application, it goes into the fact that there's healthy fish now. We got rid of the bullheads. So, it's a matter of kind of pouring over the course. I don't know if the grant application is getting amended, supplemented, like later, hey, we have an ordinance, because of course, when they submitted this in August, there wasn't a boating ordinance, and they submitted it, and they told Bowser, we have healthy fish in this lake, and now that's not the case. So there's some question marks here. Half Moon Lake, which I guess I'll be brief on this. This is the lake that Bar Engineering continued to bring up to kind of compare to East Goose Lake, but I didn't hear it brought up tonight, so I don't know if they dug into it farther. But some of the points of Half Moon Lake that was brought up at the Vlamo board meeting is that's a lake in Wisconsin, and after removing the boats, there was no improvement. And we really feel that is helpful information, or wanted to highlight that, because the Bar Engineering study had said if you got rid of the boats, there will be improvement on this lake, and they estimated it at 17%, and I've got that graph later in my slides that I can point out. And it didn't happen. We have the graph showing that the lake actually got worse when those boats were removed. That alum treatment had some marginal results. There's had to be multiple treatments, so it's very expensive. And we've talked to the folks over there, and they're continuing to purchase and pay and do the alum treatments. They also are having the weed problem. But a key point on the Half Moon Lake example is it was a water ski team using that lake, and the city owned the land and parks and removed the water ski team in that situation. There was no removal of residents. So I guess this is a key point that it's not the norm to remove residents from a lake. There are other options, and I'm taking this right from the Bar Engineering feasibility study. So this is their 2017 feasibility study where they went through the options of Goose Lake, and the last option 7 was the alum treatment of East Goose Lake, and we circled the cost. At that time, they were estimating costs of $400,000 to $500,000. And then in the last column, this is what they highlighted a lot tonight. They told us it's a benefit of $213 per pound. I guess at that time, that study was showing $500 to $625 per pound. But the thing is, this options in this graph is missing a lot of information. The expense of the weeds and getting rid of the weeds, how much is that going to cost, who's handling that, the cost of repeat applications of alum, which will have to happen, and the fact that it's short term. I mean, when we're looking at the options as stakeholders, we want to know the long-term solution. We're in this for the long haul. Next point, even if alum treatment, if we were going forward with alum treatment, you do not need to restrict boats. There's no reason to remove the boats. And we really weren't presented with data today of why these boats need to be removed. This would be a drastic measure. It would be detrimental to the property owners and our property values. We see alum treatment all the time in Minnesota. I've been digging in. Coleman Lake, I know I sent you the article on that. Bald Eagle Lake, Fish Lake, Minnetonka. You know, the thing on Bald Eagle Lake, it was a successful alum treatment that they've done, and I just want to point out that we're no different than the rest of residents on Bald Eagle Lake. We still want the recreational use of our lake. We don't want to remove our boats, and they didn't want to either. And there was no restrictions on boats. Even though it's a deeper lake, they didn't restrict boats in the shallows. They didn't remove boats. And all the lakes I've listed, of course, they have not removed boats with alum treatment. So Minnesota lakes removing a boat and taking that use from the property owners, that is not the norm. That is drastic. Coleman Lake briefly, you know what I want to highlight, because I know you all saw the article and have talked about it, and thank you so much for doing your homework and seeing that. But I talked to the residents on Coleman Lake just this morning, actually. And what's interesting is they describe it as a very, very shallow lake. The gentleman I talked to, who is a slalom skier. So it's funny, these lakes are very, very comparable, because majority of our lake, I would say, is slalom skiers. And then Kurt and I are show skiers, so maybe we're the oddball of the group. But so it's slalom skiers on Goose Lake. It's also slalom skiers on Coleman Lake. These lakes and the uses are very, very similar. But actually, they had even more boats. And the homeowners on Coleman Lake described it to me this morning as a very shallow lake. There's one spot where it's 11 feet. So according to the residents that live there, it's a shallow lake. There's more boats. They did the alum treatment. There was no removal of boats. I went through the bar engineering study regarding Coleman. No mention of removing boats or restricting boats in the shallows. Just, it's not necessary to remove boats. And I highlighted in that article how that watershed district really worked with the residents and valued that it was a recreational lake. But the result was weeds. And we can go to the next slide. So these are pictures of Coleman Lake after successful alum treatment. And as you can imagine, this is a very big concern for us as the property owners and the stakeholders. And it's interesting, too, because pouring over the actual application that went to Bowser from Vlamo, they talked about the aesthetics of Goose Lake. And we want it to look prettier. We want to do alum treatment for aesthetics. This is not, I don't think, what anybody's going for, and there has to be an extensive plan. Just saying, hey, we might get a permit and try to treat with DNR. Well, who's paying for it? We heard about weed harvesters earlier. We're not interested in mowing our lake. You know, Birch Lake has that issue, but this is the Coleman Lake after that alum treatment, and that's a major, major concern for the actual stakeholders and property owners. Finally, restricting boats is a loss to our property value, huge loss. We have a reasonable expectation of lake use. This lake is classified as recreational, and it's had recreational water skiers on it for 20 years. That's our expectation when we purchase this property. And it's a taking of property use. It's diminishing our property value. And I have some examples in real time. I know that Vlamo kind of told us that, you know, if it's a not clean lake, there could be loss of property value. But in real time, I can tell you, we lived, like I told you, on White Bear Avenue in a small home. We then moved to Rishworth Lane on a larger home with more property on East Goose Lake. You know, would we do that if this lake had major problems, major issues? No, we would not. But we decided to invest into our community, into more property on East Goose Lake, and there's other neighbors that did the same. We also, when I moved there, neighbors from across the street talked about how much this lake has improved with the water skiing, with the recreational, with the use. And Sue Lemon, who's still here with me, my neighbor across the street, she told me she bought her house in 1963, and she told me if I knew what I knew now, I would have bought a house across the street. So I'm just highlighting in real time the property value to the community. The lake is the value and the use of that lake. I want to bring up White Bear Lake and water levels and property value. I think this is a good point to make that, you know, we're no different than the residents on White Bear Lake. We want to use our lake. That's why we're there. We want the recreational use. And think about when White Bear Lake had the low levels and people were losing shoreline. Now, they weren't even losing their use 100%. They were just losing some shoreline. And that was a big problem for them. They felt it was a taking of their property. They felt it was a taking of property value. Now, with East Goose Lake, it's a conversation of taking our use 100%. So we have major issue with that. And I think in the papers it ran that property values on White Bear Lake at that time with the low water levels had decreased by 30%. I pulled that out of the paper. But with us taking away 100% use, that's a major issue. And really with these proposals, it's the Goose Lake residents that are taking all the risk. We're the stakeholders. We're the ones there for the long term. And we really have to pour over a cost-benefit analysis and taking this property use, taking our property rights, and who's going to indemnify that? That's a big question mark. And when it becomes Weed Fest, who's paying for that? And the repeat alum treatments, who's paying for that? And there's so many questions on the cost-benefit analysis, and this really would be detrimental. So Minnesota is actually the birthplace of water skiing. I'm not sure if you guys know that, but sharing today that Minnesota is the birthplace of water skiing, and we actually just had our 100-year anniversary of water skiing in Minnesota. So it's the land of 10,000 lakes that we love, and you can choose your lake. You can choose to live on a clean pond with no boats. That's not what we chose as Goose Lake residents. We chose this lake for the recreational use, and we want to use that lake and continue the use in that manner for the property we purchased. And, you know, City of Lakes and Legends, I'm sure that means different things to different people, but for me, we love White Bear Lake. We love our community, and we love the lakes that we're on. We love our lake, Goose Lake, and the Legends are the people that are on it. It's that family. It's that tradition. It's that social. This is a big deal to us. Well, hold up. You can go back. I want to, that's kind of hitting my main points, but I just want to respond now to a few things from Vlamo, and then I will conclude. So I just want to address a few things that were mentioned. Could we go to slide 17? Thanks. You know, I feel like there's a little bit of all of a sudden these kind of scare tactics, like there could be health concerns. And it was in the news a lot recently over the years, well, in the summer, about this E. coli and bacteria and health concerns in lakes. And all the articles I'm showing you right now, these are lakes without boats. These are lakes without use that arguably are quite stagnant and not getting used. And then there's this E. coli and bacteria concerns. And Goose Lake has never had an actual health concern. I don't think the city has ever been approached by any agency saying, hey, there's pollution, there's major problem in Goose Lake, it's detrimental to health, it's detrimental to pets. Nothing like that has actually happened. And it's never been a real concern. And that's actually a quote from the Vlamo meeting, because when this was discussed at the Vlamo board meeting, and we brought this up, they did say that there's never been levels in East Goose Lake high enough for a real concern. It's never been reported to pollution control. And that kind of brings me back to the grant application that I was pouring over. Nothing in here of major health concerns. Pets are dying. People will get sick. Nothing like that. You know, getting off the impaired list, of course that would be a great thing. I just want to point out that the impaired list is really just a designation. There's over, I think, 3,000 lakes that are considered impaired. I want to talk a little bit about the boat traffic. Like we said, this is not a heavy boat traffic area. So I feel like some of the slides presented kind of highlighting heavy boat traffic were just geared at West Goose, where there's a ski show and a ski team. But on East Goose, it's really the 4 families with 4 boats, and then there's 1 pontoon. So we're not talking about heavy boat traffic happening. I guess if we could go ahead and go to slide 21. Because I think this is where there was that question about what the boats are, why are the boats bad? And I don't think that was answered tonight, mind you, but kind of what they've thrown out there as far as mixing sediment. This study is over 20 years old, so a 1997 study. We were really confused by, it says horsepower and then mixing depth, but for some reason speed is not included, so how fast are these boats going? So there was a lot of questions when we were looking at this. One friend of mine said, well, does that mean a Ford Mustang on the road is worse for the roadway than a Ford Pinto? I mean, just because of horsepower. So it's kind of a lot of questions and how this study was actually done. And then we kind of did an extended formula because, of course, there's boats with 400 horsepower on White Bear Lake. Would that cause some kind of earthquake according to these numbers? So this is a 20-year-old study that I don't think really rings true of what the boats are doing. If we could go to slide 20. I'll just briefly, this is again from that BAR feasibility study where they thought that without motorboat activity on Half Moon Lake, it was going to improve by 17%. And we know that did not happen. If we go to slide 22. And this, again, is going to that horsepower argument. I was able to find a newer study that was actually completed on lakes, so not a model, an actual assessment, because that is something I should say. You know, a lot of these, bar engineering is great, but a lot of them are models. The slide I just showed you, that was a bathtub model, so of course not done on an actual lake. So it's data from models, which is helpful, but not actually on a lake. So this one's out of Penn State, and I can definitely circulate this to the council after, and I won't pour over it too much. But basically, they found that horsepower had no impact. More horsepower did not have more impact on the sediment below. When boats are on plane, they're on plane. They're not mixing the sediment down below. And like I said, I could certainly send this to you, and they found no difference between a boat, an idle, or a high horsepower ski boat on the mixing of any sediment. You know, Ms. Tanner pointed out a point that I was going to make, that really we haven't seen these big algae blooms in quite some time. I was going to say 5 years. She said 2013, so it looks like 6 years. And then, you know, like I said, I hate to say scare tactics, but we talked about nationwide algae, but there hasn't been an issue of major risk on Goose Lake. There has not been any dog deaths. You know, we can't make these kind of drastic decisions based on possibility and kind of these far out thoughts. And like I said, there's always testing going on at East Goose Lake. We know it because it's in our backyard, and we have communication with Vlamo. And again, never getting to those levels of reporting dangerous bacteria, dangerous for the water, dangerous for the St. Paul water, nothing like that. You know, everything we've seen as far as alum treatment, and again, why we think it's not the right fit, is that it's just with shallow lakes that it has that mean success rate of 5.7 years. And I don't think Vlamo really can show that it would be above that. They've said that, hey, they've gotten better, and we're seeing some with 10 to 15 years. And then they said, well, there's been success at Bald Eagle, which you can't really have it both ways. I thought Bald Eagle's a deeper lake that we're not supposed to compare to because we have to remove boats, so it's got a little confusing. The shallow lakes, the data is still saying a 5.7-year mean. I don't know that there's examples of a shallow lake that had benefit from an alum treatment for 15 years. And again, with the boat traffic and just understanding, I think there wasn't good understanding, perhaps, on the amount of boat traffic on East Goose Lake. I mean, and the fact is, of course, we ski in the deepest areas because of our props. We don't ski in the shallows.
How does the props affect that then? Why do you go in the deeper part with a prop then?
Well, you don't want to hit your prop on the bottom.
Okay.
Is what I'm pointing out.
So the prop would be closer to the bottom.
So we ski in the middle. Where it's at the deepest point, just like the Coleman Lake
understood.
Folks.
Thank you.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm kind of skipping around a little bit just now because I want to address, you know, our understanding is this alum treatment is a permanent bond, and that could be problematic for us in the future if we want to try to do something else for our lake long term. You know, it's interesting with the Bowser grant. It talked about working with Goose Lake residents, and it talked about the survey that Vlamo sent out, but they did not share with Bowser the results of that survey. They did not share with Bowser that Goose Lake residents were 100% against it and 100% against any restrictions on boats. And that kind of brings up a question to me. I guess we really would want to learn more from Bowser, because if Bowser's the one saying that, hey, we'd give the funding if the boats are gone, which I don't see any concrete evidence of that. But if that's the case, wouldn't Bowser want more information about what boats are on the lake and how often they're running and learn a little bit more about the boat traffic there? And like I said, Coleman Lake actually has heavier boat traffic than East Goose Lake. You know, there was a question about, you know, if we do nothing. I think it was made clear that nothing would happen if we do nothing. And it's not as if the Goose Lake residents are coming to you complaining, like, we want something done about our lake. We're actually saying, we're happy. Our lake is improving. It looks the best it's ever been, and we want to continue the recreational use on our property. As far as this 3-year ban, we keep seeing, you know, and you can't help but feel that it's part of the agenda. The small print was then no motorized boats. The recommendation that was submitted to you said then the suggestion would be no motorized boats. So of course we're combating this full force, feeling like it won't just be 3 years, and that's a major concern with our property value. And even if alum treatment worked for these 15 years, and there is so many maybes and so many issues, obviously with it being shallow lake and likely not to be that successful, then the weeds are going to take over. So as stakeholders on the lake, we got the issues of the weeds. And just, we can't be expected to live on the edge of our seat. When are we going to get to use our boats again? That's not acceptable. That's not why we purchased our lake property here in the Great White Bear Lake. I'm going to wrap up here. And I'm going to go ahead and do that with slide 16. Thanks, Ann. Okay, this is kind of bringing us to the actual ordinance. We have some major concerns. For one thing, the start date, I just want to point out, the ordinance being read tonight is taking our boats off February of 2020, but the PowerPoint presentation of LAMO tonight indicated that the first treatment would not be until the fall. So we're a little confused. Why would the families have the lake taken away for the summer of 2020? That was a major concern from everybody. And just this ordinance has so many question marks that to us, it feels like this ordinance is premature. We don't know if the funding is there yet. We don't know if the funding is there yet. Why not wait to see where Bowser rings in on this, truly? You know, they approve these funds all the time without removal of boats. I can't find an example in Minnesota of residents being removed from their boats or removed from their lake. So these grants are approved all the time without boat ordinances. If LAMO truly felt that the boat ordinance has to be there or we're not getting the money, then the reverse order should have happened. We're putting the cart in front of the horse. If that was the case, the application deadline was in August. This application has been submitted and is under review and it's under scoring with Bowser. And there is no ordinance and they're already considering it. And like I said, there's also a number of issues in this application that now we know not to be true and at issue. The ordinance feels premature when they don't even have the funding. And I heard that because it's just much too serious and drastic to pass this when we don't even know if the project is going to go forward, if they're going to get the funds. There's too many question marks. Then there's the DNR component. Of course, we know they would have to have approval. And pouring over this ordinance, it just feels like there's too many ifs. It's if the DNR approves it. And then, well, if they don't, we might do a contested hearing. And it's these question marks. And we want to evaluate our alternatives. We want to look to experts. And there's always experts on both sides. And we'd like another set of eyes on all the science, and the stakeholders really have to be involved in this decision, as we're the ones taking all the risks. This is our property value, this is our property rights and our property use at issue. And so given that, pouring over this and the seriousness, I'm just going to submit to you that we feel the public hearing should be postponed because there's just not enough time. This is a first reading October 22nd. And by November 26th, which is the Tuesday of Thanksgiving, having that public hearing it's starting to feel to us a little bit rushed because of the seriousness of it and how concerned we are with this and how devastating it feels to us. It just feels this ordinance is premature. Let's see where Bowser weighs in. Does Bowser think alum treatment is good for Goose Lake? I don't know. Are they going to give this money? We don't know. There's just too many question marks. But this is a very serious issue for Goose Lake residents, and thank you so much for your time and attention.
I've got one more that wants to speak. Okay. So I've got Jill Sims.
Not a resident, she's a lobbyist.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. My name is Jill Sims, and I am the Great Lakes Policy and Engagement Manager for the National Marine Manufacturers Association, NMMA. We're the leading trade association for the recreational boating industry in North America. You might recognize NMMA as we host 2 consumer boat shows in Minnesota. We host the Minneapolis Boat Show every January and the Northwest Sport Show each spring. Our Minnesota members include boat manufacturers like Lund and Crestliner in New York Mills, Alumacraft in St. Peter, Marine Tech Products, a local accessories manufacturer in Vadnais Heights. Each year, the U.S. recreational boating industry generates more than $170 billion in economic activity, supporting 35,000 businesses and 691,000 American jobs. In Minnesota, the recreational boating industry supports nearly 11,000 jobs across 690 businesses. The annual economic impact is $3.1 billion in the state of Minnesota, and annual retail sales of new boats, engines, and marine accessories exceeds $800 million. I don't need to tell you, boating is an integral part of the lifestyle in Minnesota. We have over 825,000 registered watercraft in the state of Minnesota, making us the #2 state in the country for watercraft registration, which is something I think many of us are very proud of. As Minnesotans, we recognize the importance of outdoor recreation and time well spent on the water with family and friends. I encourage you to reconsider the proposed ordinance to ban motorized access on East Goose Lake. The proposed ordinance would not only impact residents of East Goose Lake, but potentially jeopardize motorized access for boaters across the state. To my knowledge, no lake in Minnesota has banned motorized access during an alum treatment. Many lakes have seen successful treatments without banning motorized access. In fact, Coleman Lake down the road is another shallow lake which saw success with an alum treatment and did not ban motorized access during or after the treatment. Additionally, boating access is an important factor in home values, with waterfront homes generally commanding double in the marketplace. Restricting boating opportunities would threaten local economies and real estate values for waterfront and nearby communities. As stewards of the environment and the communities where we live and work, the recreational boating community continues to collaboratively address environmental protection and safety throughout our waterways. We encourage you to work with residents, the public, stakeholders, to explore options to treat water quality in East Goose Lake. Previously, recommendations have been made of other options, from alum treatment to spent lime, reestablishing native vegetation to pursue cleaner water in East Goose Lake. We urge you to vote no on an ordinance to ban motorized access and welcome the opportunity to further discuss collaborative solutions for East Goose Lake. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Hey, good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Paul Gartsky. I'm at 4189 White Bear Avenue. And I won't reiterate a lot of things. I agree with everything that Lindsay said, but I just want to share our perspective. I think I'm the newest. My wife and daughter, Lydia, were the newest residents on the lake. We moved on like 3 years ago. We read all the reports beforehand, so we understood the status of it as an impaired lake. But knowing that there was no precedence of removing residential boaters from a lake for these types of treatments, we went ahead and we purchased our home. We are one of the 4 boat owners on the lake. We love it. It's been amazing seeing my daughter go from not knowing how to swim when she was 3 when we moved on the lake to now she won't get out of the lake, and she makes me pull her on the tube and pull her on the surfboard like until my arms are about ready to fall off. But it's an integral part in why we moved to White Bear Lake and why we love it here, and just the fact that that can potentially be going away. And to Lindsay's point, it's not a 3-year ban that we're really talking about. The recommendation comes down to no motorized boating after that 3 years, and then I think it's a 10 horsepower restriction. A 10 horsepower boat isn't going to pull me up on a water ski, and that's part of the reason why we moved on to the lake. And we actually had a very similar story to when Kurt saw his house out. We walked into the kitchen, and you can see the lake from the back. And I told our realtor we'd like to make an offer. My wife about shot me and was like, "Let's see the house first." But she loved it. She loved the lake, and we expected to continue using the lake recreationally. And we love the community. We've fallen in love with it, and this has become the place that we want to set roots down, in part because of Goose Lake. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, I will close the public hearing.
There's got to be more.
Well,
Paul on my house, so I thought it was a good transition there. So he bought my house 2 years ago. Sorry, Scott Schoeneman, 1971 Richworth Lane. And I moved down the street. So one of the reasons I moved down the street is my wife and I were looking to start a family. And we looked all over the city for the lake that was right for us. So we don't work in White Bear Lake. Like, I work in Minneapolis, my wife works in St. Paul. Like, we didn't have any roots. She didn't grow up around here. I didn't. So we looked all over the city for what was right for our family. She lived on East Goose for about 10, 15 years before I moved in with her. We got married. And we felt East Goose Lake was right for us. We actually met on the University of Iowa water skiing team 20 years ago. And East Goose is the right lake for us to be able to water ski, to be able to use boats on. It works for us. It works for my 2 young boys that are 1 and 3. And that's why I live on that lake to water ski, right? I just spent $300,000 remodeling my house. I spent $10,000 on a dock, $10,000 on a boat lift. Like, the reason we're on that lake is to ski. And since my wife's been there for that long, I've been there for 5 years. Like, the communication that this was possible, I think, was probably a little bit lacking. I went to the January meeting of this year, and the videos online. Valamo didn't even talk about an alum treatment in January of this year. They talked about spent lime because they couldn't afford alum. They talked about a lot of different options. It's gone from in January, we're going to put spent lime, alum's too expensive, to, 8 months later, and we're trying to ban all motorized boating on the lake. This ordinance is quicker than I got my variance from my house to add 12 feet to the front of my house. That took 5 months. So, I think we're going a little bit fast here. I think from what I want, my kids are on that lake. My kids swim in that lake. I don't know. Don might be a better parent than I am. But I don't have concerns about that. I don't think high phosphorus levels or low phosphorus levels are going to have, that impact on the water. I think what we're talking about, clarity of water and maybe the health of water. Big Island on the 4th of July, I heard, was really dirty. And, there's a bunch of people that got sick. We're not banging boats on Minnetonka, right? So for me, it's all about being on the lake, skiing on the lake, and this is a big deal. And whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or whatever, it is a big deal. I would challenge I don't know how people on Coleman Lake ski. I know it's different, but I don't know how. You get up behind a boat and you ski around. The DNR website says it's 9 feet deep, and I don't know, it became 12 and a half now, but DNR website says it's 9. Keller Lake, I heard, is going for alum treatment, or they already did. That's an 8 feet deep lake. The problem is when you drive by those lakes, you drive by them on 36, right? You see all the weeds. So I just want you guys to understand, as homeowners, the reason we're on that lake is to ski. If we're not on that lake to ski, we're going to leave. And we buy those houses on that lake to ski. And I think that's what you need to understand is I thought it was our right to be able to do that. I think you guys can take that away, I guess. But, taking a boater's right away in Minnesota has never been done in Minnesota for an alum treatment. As far as I know, it's never been done in the United States for an alum treatment. This is my up north cabin. I don't have a cabin up north. I can't afford one. But I can afford that lake. And I sit out there, enjoy it with my kids. So don't take it away from me.
Thank you.
I'll be short and sweet. Good evening. My name's Melissa Laughlin. I'm here on behalf of the Cabin 61 owners, the Cabin 61 LLC and Goose Lake Development Group LLC. Our ownership group are all avid water skiers, and we bought the property at 4150 Hoffman Road, Cabin 61, for recreational use of the lake. Our property is, of course, over on West Goose Lake, but we are very concerned, and we don't want to see precedent made of government taking away the use of the lake, the recreational use, as property owners. We bought the property to better the area, to make improvements, including to the lake. Goose Lake Development Group has actually asked for a grant from Vlamo to work on natural vegetation to support the lake. Vlamo continuously promotes grant money to support shoreline and place natural vegetation. However, we feel this has been kind of an empty offer because with multiple proposals, they've been declined each time, even though they have been partners with us in the design process. So, we want to continue to improve the lake and also continue to have recreational use and access. And there are other viable options to improve the lake that maintain that recreational access. So as White Bear Lake business property owners on Goose Lake, we would really encourage the council to vote no on this and to continue to let us have that recreational access and use. Thank you so much for your time.
I'll be really quick too. I just want to say something on behalf of the water ski team. My name is John Paul Grubbs. I've been a resident for 19 and a half years in White Bear Lake, and most of my concerns have been addressed by other individuals, but one of the largest here is, to me, would be the idea of this process then spreading into West Goose Lake. And if that was the case, my fear would be one that I feel justified, is that the changes to East Goose Lake would trickle down to West Goose, this directly impacting the Midwest ski otters, my family, and the White Bear Lake community. As we know, the ski otters have been here since 1995, 100-plus members, and we do have a big part in the community. If the boating restriction were to enact on this lake, the team would be forced to either find a new location that's suitable for our unique needs, or the team would collapse entirely. This is extremely concerning, and it should be also a concern to the community. We've learned to ski with the ski otters, as most Minnesotans have, as a recreation. But as a team, we not only teach the skiing, but we also do community work. And with that perspective, the team provides weekly entertainment for the families and friends to gather, and it is clearly supported by the community, with hundreds of spectators showing up weekly, lining the shores of West Goose Lake. In between practices and shows, the team also hosts learn to ski clinics and adaptive skiers as well. I feel that the ski team deserves to have this use of the lake, especially after being on the lake for more than 20 years. My fear is that what will happen next year or the years to come. The second concern, and it's already been addressed, is the homeowner value, and that eliminating boats on East Goose Lake would decrease the home values exponentially and immediately eliminate the lifestyle of these property owners. I respectfully ask you to make no changes to East Goose Lake. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll try to be quick, too. Christy Skillings, representing the Midwest Ski Otters on Hoffman Road. John, thank you, is one of our members. We have, he said about 100-some members. I want to tell you a little bit about who I'm up here representing, and I'm authorized, I think, to speak for all 136 members of our team. Of those 136, just so you know the type of people that are looking at this with very scrutiny eyes, 106 of them are water skiers. 106 of them ski in our shows, ranging in age from 2 to past retirement, that are actively skiing. The other 30 members that I said are active are behind the scenes each and every show. They are riding in the boats, they're working on the docks, they're working on the stage, they're working on the announcing, they're working on the sound. They are working along the shore in multiple ways. That's 30 people behind the scenes every week to make our shows happen. So that's the type of group that we're working with. There's about 35 families that make up our team. Families within the community, over 1/3 of them are actually from White Bear Lake or live in White Bear Lake. The other 2/3 come into White Bear Lake 2 to 5 days a week, 4 months out of the year. So that we're bringing them into the community, not to mention the hundreds, thousands of people that come to the shows throughout the summer. I think it's a very awesome and unique thing that we have that is unique to this community, and we don't want it to go away. And I know that there has been a mention, I think, in the ordinance, or this is not going to affect the boating on West Goose Lake. The Vlamo proposal specifically said boating and water skiing will be allowed to continue on West Goose Lake. So why am I here? Past experience and the current events. How quickly we got here. I think they said from January to now. I think Dawn talked about a study that started for Vlamo in 2012. Part of that study came out some recommendations. During those recommendations was the primary driver of internal loading is due to motorboating, specifically water skiing. That Vlamo should work to develop a management plan to limit the duration and frequency of motorboating on the lake. They were not talking about East Goose Lake. They were talking specifically about West Goose Lake. At that time and at those recommendations, they weren't talking about removing restrictions on East Goose Lake at all. So this is hitting home again. Even though it wasn't East Goose Lake that they're talking about and West Goose Lake was excluded, it seems that this is always in the background. It's there, and I believe the Bar Engineering report actually said an in-alum treatment is also recommended for West Goose Lake, as the modeling results indicate that it would be needed to ensure that the water quality goals standards are met on a consistent basis. So excluding it from the ordinance or excluding it from the paperwork doesn't mean it's off the table. I mean, the writing's there. We can see that West Goose Lake is on there. So we are very concerned that the precedence that is set on East Goose Lake is going to follow the flow of the water and end up affecting not only myself, but everybody on the team. So it becomes a question, I think was in one of your city memos, said, do the benefits outweigh the costs? And what that really means to me, I guess, is do taking away the rights of individuals go for the greater good? Is that how you get there? Is that how you achieve it? I mean, if this were, all things being considered, if this were White Bear Lake, I guarantee we wouldn't be having this discussion. 19 residents probably seems small. We can brush them aside. If it were White Bear Lake and it was affecting all of those people and you were taking voting away from all of them, I guarantee we would not be having this discussion. I agree that it came up here too quickly. Before I leave, I just wanted to clarify one thing that I think Dawn said that I think was a misrepresentation. She talked about boating and eroding the shoreline and how it has damaged West Goose Lake shoreline. Natural vegetation has been removed in a couple areas on West Goose Lake. It has been removed directly in front of where the ski team performs. It has also been removed on the property on the south side of the shoreline. I'd say 75% or more of that lake still have the natural vegetation, and it has not eroded. That natural vegetation on that lake is still there, is still solid, is still strong. The shoreline erosion we are seeing is happening where that vegetation has been removed. So I think that was just a point that I wanted to clarify. I've been on the team for 25 years. My kids, who are 16 and 18, have grown up on the ski team. Since the time they were this little, they have been swimming, skiing, ingesting Goose Lake, as all of us have. They're healthy. I've 25 years. I've had no signs. What I thought was sunburn maybe was a reaction. What I'm saying is we haven't seen anybody have any ailments. Anything bad hasn't happened. If it's going to happen, I would hope it would happen before 25 years. But I'm 25 years at proof standing here that I've been in that lake more times probably than almost anyone. And I've got a clean bill of health, as do my 16 and 18-year-old kids. I would just like to, I guess, close quick and just say, I just know that what you're doing today not only affects these 19 people that live on East Goose Lake, it's going to affect, I guess, anybody. As a homeowner myself that has property on a lake, it's going to affect me. It affects me just to see what you're contemplating doing and the rights you're contemplating taking away and justifying it for the greater good. So, thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? If not, I'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the council. Thoughts, comments?
Just to clarify a question that was brought up on the enactment date or the date of the prohibition on motorboats. March 1, 2020 is in the resolution. So is it really, are we going to do the treatment in the fall, or are we going to start the treatment right after when the spring comes? Do we know that answer?
Well, at first this has to get approved, so.
Yeah. On the proposal, it would be March 2020. I think Ms. Carpenter said that the treatment wasn't going to be until the fall.
Until the fall, why
Is there
would
a
you
gap?
stop the boats in the spring?
Councilmember Walsh. So original discussions with Vlamo when we had talked about this a couple months ago when they were bringing forth a recommendation was looking at having the restrictions earlier, but I certainly think that there would be opportunity to look at a later date, based on the feedback we've heard tonight.
A later date of what? A
Later date of it being in what the boats needing.
We're going to do a fall treatment. We could have a summer of skiing and
Correct.
then do the fall treatment. Okay. I mean, when we get there, we could amend that.
Clarification. Part of that second treatment is really on the second treatment.
What second treatment? We're talking the first treatment.
Right, but I mean, the fall treatment is fine. There's no weeds. The flocking can come down because it's a dead lake. There's no vegetation in the lake whatsoever, which clarity will bring vegetation, which I wonder, healthy lake, clear water, weeds, native weeds.
You're confusing me. It's too late.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
Never mind.
That's why it's too late.
The result of a healthy lake. Weeds is one way we know.
I'm done. Sure, please.
Mayor,
do.
members of the council, maybe just to clarify where we're at for tonight. So this was our first reading, and we had an opportunity to hear some significant comments from both Vlamo and the public. So the question I think that we have before us, at least for this evening, is I did hear, number one, a request to perhaps extend, and this would be coming from the property owners, the time between this reading and our second reading, which is, I think, something that would be appropriate to talk about this evening. Obviously we would then, regardless of when that public hearing date would occur, we would have a lot of opportunity for council to follow up with additional questions, and I think with fresh minds and opportunities to think about what's presented, I think that would be appropriate. But I really think what we need to understand is, are we on course for having a second reading for the November 26th meeting, or would you prefer to allow for additional time, in which case I would suggest, given the holidays, we wait till the second meeting in January?
Councilmember Bean.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One thing that's very clear to me is that it's the residents that are impacted by this, and the residents are the observers who observed the benefit of boating on the lake. If the residents wanted to ban boating for 3 years,
they'd come tell us.
They would come tell us, and I would agree to it. But if the residents don't want to ban boating, and the information that we received prior is that it's affecting that lake, there's no downstream consequence at this point. If at some future date there's a downstream consequence, I would be more than happy to revisit it. But if there's no downstream consequence,
that's not true. That's not true. It flows downstream to Lake Vadis.
But they said, say.
They said, where was the science from they? The science that was presented from Valamo saying...
Valamo stated that there was no downstream consequence.
Okay. So, yeah,
Said
it doesn't
they
go
haven't measured
downstream.
any yet. They haven't done the test. To be clear, there could be.
True. The test
They haven't
hasn't
done
done.
the testing. That's what they said.
But I guess... No, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I apologize.
No, don't. It's fine.
Yeah. So, and what I'm perceiving is it doesn't have to be done at this time. There's no risk to delay. So perhaps we need more information, perhaps we need more cooperation with the residents, with the, what's the long-term effect. I need more information. I don't have enough information at this point. After today, I don't believe I'll have enough information by
the time the second reading comes up.
I would not have enough information in 2 weeks.
Well, if there was an indication this shouldn't go forward, we could pull it, but Councilmember Edberg.
Do we know when Bowser will make its funding decisions? Because that's another one of those go, no-go points. If there's no funding, the rest of the conversation is moot until funding is obtained.
Well, Mayor, Councilmember Edberg, I would defer that actually to Vlamo. I'm not sure if you've had any indication from them as to when they'll make a determination.
Go ahead.
The end of January.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it seems to me that we would not host another conversation, the second reading, until after a decision has been made, and only then if Bowser says yes.
But on the other hand, these residents, we want to put them in suspense for another 2-3 months?
I think if the answer is that we're not going to do any action until we find out whether it's an issue, they will be fine with that. But they can speak for themselves. Separately, not tonight.
And Mayor, Council, I'll just to clarify, I think, and I'll look for a nod. I did understand or hear a request from the residents to allow for some more time. So it seems to be consistent with what Councilmember Edberg is suggesting, but
it's fine with me. Whatever you guys want to do. Councilmember Walsh.
I'm fully informed and ready to vote, but if people want to give it a little delay, we can do that too.
We can't vote. I mean,
well, in November, I'm ready to vote no in November on the ordinance change or on the ordinance. But if there's more time is beneficial to everybody else, I'm all happy to do that too. I'm happy to delay.
Well, I would say the same thing as last discussion, Madam Mayor. Hey, if we want to kill it, kill it. Right now, stop it, pull it.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable course of action if that's what the council's feeling right now
If
today.
there's 3 of you that are leaning no, then I think we pull it.
So moved.
Can we do that? Make a motion? Can we make a motion to pull? Okay, I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Kevin.
No, I don't have a second. Oh.
Well, Kevin raised his hand.
Well, yeah, but I've got a motion. I got to have a second, then I can have a discussion.
I'll second for the purposes of the discussion.
Councilmember Edberg.
So I'm not ready to vote yes or no at this point in time. I do want to spend more time with the science. My sense is that alum is the right treatment. I'm not convinced by anything that I've heard that suggests that it's the wrong treatment for this situation. My absence of clarity is around the necessity for banning boating and how much and in what order. And that's the point where I want to spend some time. And if we don't have to make the decision at all because Bowser isn't going to fund the thing, then we can put this conversation off until after. So I'm not ready to vote tonight, but if there are 3 who are ready to say no, I'm totally cool with that.
Okay.
I'll withdraw my motion. Let's wait and get more information.
Chris, yes. We have to vote, don't we? We have a motion and a second.
Madam Mayor, yes. Unfortunately, it's now the body's motion, so we're not able just to withdraw it.
We can't do that.
And this vote is only to withdraw.
There could be a motion to table this action if you want. Otherwise, it would go through a up or down vote.
You made the motion.
Of order. Does a motion to table supersede a motion to act? I'm saying I'm looking for the opportunity to make another motion that facilitates our action.
Madam Mayor,
I move
yes,
to
a
table
motion,
this action to set it on the table until such time as the award of the grant is known, at which point we can schedule for an appropriate council meeting.
Second.
Point of order.
Okay.
We have an motion and a second. It's been under discussion. You were not motion or second on that.
That's why I asked whether a motion to table takes precedence.
I don't believe that's
and the
a point of
parliamentarian
order.
says it does.
Attorney says it does.
Madam Mayor, yes. I mean, you don't have to be part of the motion that's proposed for tabling. So now you have before you, Madam Mayor and Council, a motion to table that's been moved and seconded. And so it would be appropriate to act on that motion.
Sure.
And of course, if that passes, then it's tabled, and there is no action on the original.
All right, all those in favor of tabling, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay.
So, Madam Mayor, Council, just so to clarify what was decided, so we are, staff will not revisit this with Council or bring it back until we have some word about whether or not the grant was successful, the application was successful. I just want to, I guess, look at you because, okay. So we'll hear in June, or excuse me, July. January. J starts with, sounds like. We're going to hear in January of next year.
Yeah, we're still not done. We got more business to do. So.
Say, well, everyone's leaving, that's fine.
Excuse me.
That's fine.
Never mind. Okay, never mind.
10:30.
10:30. We got 5 minutes.
We can do this, and so, Mayor, members of the council, we have, if we get to 10:30, we have to
vote.
Take some action, so we'll try to go very quickly, unless you want to
Okay,
contemplate
so
that
we'll
now.
move on to the 9A, resolution providing benefits for employees of the City of White Bear Lake who are not covered by the employment agreements.
Madam Mayor, members of the council.
Can I interrupt? I'm just going to pause for a moment. So the presentation may take a few minutes. I want to ask council if you want us to review the memorandum that was included in the packet regarding employee benefits.
No.
If not, then we're good, Carrie. So. So then we just would.
Okay, so we're going to just go ahead. If everybody's read the memo, I will need a motion to approve. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the consent agenda.
Move approve. Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to discussion. We'll skip it because nobody wants to talk about it. We'll do it next time.
Madam Mayor, since it is on the agenda, can I ask, was there, we had a conversation on the Tobacco 21 briefly.
Real quickly, I've talked with 3 of our 4 neighbors. One is interested in doing one if we do one. The second one's going to wait for the state. Third one, not sure, and the fourth one I have not had a chance to talk with. So that's kind of where we're at. I was kind of thinking that if our neighbors all agreed to the same thing and we all did something, that, might be better than us just being an island saying no tobacco sales. If our neighboring communities did it too, it might be more effective.
Yeah. My past preference has always been something like this should be done on the state level. I understand that we've been.
The state, we could all die.
Right, well,
I'm sorry.
I'll make a prediction. It's going to happen this year.
Of course it is, because it's going to be popular and they're going to slip it through.
We'll slip it through. It's going to happen. T21 will happen at the
Okay,
that's a
then that's
prediction.
fine.
And I got inside information.
Fine. Well, yeah, it'll be an easy peasy thing to do. It'll be popular and they all look like heroes.
I wouldn't characterize it that way.
It's fine. So that's where we are. Okay, what do you have something?
Mayor, Council, I'll be very quick because we have a couple minutes left here. Just a reminder that the volunteer recognition dinner is on Tuesday, October 29th, 6 o'clock at the Boatworks, and we'll send out another reminder to you for your calendars. November 19th, we have our last work session of the year, and that will be to go over our non-general fund budget items. They're also just pointing out that you have information on the dais related to some findings from the MPCA that talk about the water gremlin site, along with FAQs that were prepared by staff on the potential for lead in some households, and that is in following with the conversation we had by some recent testing we had at our with our regular testing that we do in our households. I'm going quickly. And as the council knows, a brochure has been mailed out to residents, and it should arrive in households probably tomorrow or Thursday. And then lastly, just real quickly, we'll be bringing a resolution to council for consideration at our next meeting to accept a grant from Ramsey County to place an organics collection site at our Public Works location, which we're really excited about. So there may be more. But with that, I don't know if you quickly had anything, either of you?
Follow-up question?
Yes.
I mean, the study from the MP regarding water,
Yes.
that was airborne lead study
Mhm.
or findings.
For water gremlin.
For water gremlin. Just FYI, there's also water soil stuff that's coming out that's not meeting standards that we have more of a clue about. That's in the middle of Alamo, that's in the Goose Lake water drainage area, just FYI.
Wait a minute. Okay. What?
Just saying. But no, that's a much bigger concern as far as the soil and lead.
Have no.
Yeah, nothing. He just. Thank you for. Well, good. We'll be out in the hall and call us when you're done.
Emails, yeah.
I do not have any updates.
Okay, well, do you have everything done you want? All right, good. Thank you all. It's a long meeting. I appreciate everybody staying on board with this. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Kara, here you go.
Board meetings used to go to 12:30 and 1.